Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for joining us here this evening. We'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. I'll note for the record that all members of council are present and accounted for, except for Councilman Binder. I'm not aware that he won't be joining us, so I'm sure he's just running a few minutes late at this time. And as we do every meeting, we begin with Pledge of Allegiance. So if you're able, please stand and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First item up on tonight's agenda is the consent agenda. Consent agenda consists of the council meeting minutes from the meeting of February 21st, 2022, and alcoholic beverage license application, PH-AB-22-03, Shake Shack, Georgia, LLC, DBA Shake Shack, 11780 Haynesbridge Road, Alpharetta, Georgia, 30009. Is there anyone on council who would like to remove anything from the consent agenda this evening? Seeing none, I'll call for a motion and note for the record that Councilman Binder has joined us now. So all are present and accounted for.
Motion to approve.
We have a motion by Councilman Mitchell and a second by Councilman Hypes, and that was to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor, please vote yes. Otherwise, vote no. And it is passed unanimously. That'll wrap up the consent agenda, and we'll move on to the new business portion of tonight's meeting. And the first item under new business is the Morrison Road Sidewalk contract. Director Sisevich, you have the floor.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Before tonight is the Morrison Sidewalk contract. Refresh everybody's memory, this was a 2016 bond project. City staff designed the project, bid the project out. A1 Construction was awarded the project. And unfortunately, during the project, they fell into bankruptcy. And we were fortunate that they finished the sidewalk aspect of the project and the curb and gutter and the asphalt. But we now have the punch list to take care of, as well as some hand railing to be installed. So working with Bovis, Carroll, and Birch, and through the surety, we've discovered that we're able to contract to a firm who's already under contract with the city right now, Accelerate Construction, as well as the subcontractor who did all the handrail installations is going to keep their costs the same, which was Eccles Welding, and we were able to complete the project, punch list and the handrails equal to, if not a little bit less than what we actually were under contract with A1 Construction.
Thanks, sir. Do we have any questions from council? Councilman Will.
I'm just curious, did we lose money on the bankrupt contractor?
No.
Any other questions from council? Thanks, sir. Ms. Shapiro, do we have any public comment cards on this item?
We do not, sir.
However, if anyone is here and would like to speak on the Morrison Sidewalk project, now's your opportunity. Seeing none, we'll close public comment. Do I have a motion from council?
Yes, Mayor. I move to approve the tender and release agreement between owner and surety Granite RE Inc. and approve the hiring of completion contractors Accelerate Construction LLC for $45,523.95 and Eccles Welding for $37,995 to complete work associated with the Morrison Road Sidewalk project and authorize the mayor to execute all necessary documents.
Have a motion by Councilman Dorito, second by Mayor Pro Tem Dan Merkel. Any discussion? Just want to congratulate you on getting through this tedious process, because I know it has been years trying to get through all of this and get this road project done, or this sidewalk project done. So I appreciate your patience and your expertise in bringing this forward and getting it done. No other comments? All those in favor? The motion to approve Morrison Road Sidewalk contract as outlined by Councilman Dorito, please vote yes. Otherwise, vote no. And it does pass unanimously.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Thank you. Next item up is a resolution to authorize the use of eminent domain 13000 Meridian Court. Mr. Stacy.
A resolution of the mayor and council of the city of Alpharetta, Georgia, to authorize the use of eminent domain to acquire certain property located at 13000 Meridian Court, Alpharetta, Georgia, tax parcel number 21-5680-1054-029-4 for road project McGinnis Ferry Road widening from Ronald Reagan Boulevard / Union Hill Road to Hospital Parkway, whereas the city of Alpharetta, the city, in conjunction with the cities of Johns Creek and Forsyth County, has determined that it is necessary to construct a road project which includes the widening of and construction of other operational improvements to a portion of McGinnis Ferry Road, such road project being known as McGinnis Ferry Road from Ronald Reagan Boulevard / Union Hill Road to Hospital Parkway project, and whereas in order to construct the project, it is necessary to acquire certain rights to and over, under, through, and across the property now or formerly owned by Reza Ray Hedayati and Khadijah Malak, located at 13000 Meridian Court, tax parcel number 21-5680-1054-029-4, within the city of Alpharetta, Georgia, reference project parcel 62, as further described and shown in attachment A, attached here to and incorporated herein by this reference, and whereas the mayor and council have considered the project and determined that the project and the use of eminent domain to acquire those certain rights to and over, under, through, and across the foregoing property are necessary in the public interest and must be carried out expeditiously to ensure the timely completion of the project. Now, therefore, it is hereby resolved by the mayor and council of the city of Alpharetta, Georgia, as follows: for public road purposes and to meet the public necessity for immediately acquiring the subject property rights, which are hereby declared, the mayor and council authorize the city attorney's office to acquire the use of eminent domain pursuant to Title 32 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated, the necessary property rights to and over, under, through, and across the property located at 13000 Meridian Court, tax parcel number 21-5680-1054-029-4, in order to ensure the timely completion of the project, McGinnis Ferry Road from Ronald Reagan Boulevard / Union Hill Road to Hospital Parkway. Further, the mayor and the city administrator are specifically authorized to execute on behalf of and is assigned by every member of the governing authority of the city, the mayor and council, any and all documents necessary to further the filing of any petition for condemnation or declaration of taking related to the same and or in furtherance of this resolution.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Stacy, since I know we have several of these, and just wanted to make sure people understand the situation on this, could you explain why we're going through this process at this point?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. At this point, we do have some project deadlines. We're in negotiation with quite a few property owners, and all indications are that most of those will be resolved favorably. But to ensure that we both meet the requirements of Georgia law and meet the project deadlines, we do need to have resolutions passed over the next month or so to make sure we hit those deadlines. That said, we will continue to negotiate with the property owners and have every expectation that the vast majority of these properties will be resolved without the need to file formal condemnation pleadings. The resolution does not condemn the property. It just sets us up to do that if we need to.
Right, thank you. And for those who aren't attorneys, the issue is that we have hard deadlines. This is a project that involves the Department of Transportation, Forsyth County, City of Johns Creek, and the City of Alpharetta. And we have hard deadlines that we have committed to getting these property acquisitions for right-of-way to widen the road done by a certain time. While we may have time to resolve this without having to condemn this portion of their yards that are adjacent to this road, if we wait until a month from now, it's too late for us to go through that legal process. So what we have to do is go ahead and begin this legal process to make sure that if we aren't able to resolve it without going to court, then we can at that point. Otherwise, it would be too late, and we would miss our deadlines and quite frankly risk millions of dollars of road improvements that would be beneficial to our city. So just want to make sure everybody understands. It's not our hope or intention to have to condemn these properties, but it is a possibility, so we have to be prepared just in case. Thank you, sir. Any other questions from council at this time? Ms. Shapiro, do we have any public comment cards on this item?
We do not, sir.
But if anyone would like to come forward and speak on this matter, now is your chance to do so. Seeing no one, we'll close public comment. Do I have a motion from council?
Mayor, I move to approve a resolution of the mayor and council of the city of Alpharetta, Georgia, to authorize the use of eminent domain to acquire certain property located at 13000 Meridian Court, Alpharetta, Georgia, tax parcel number 21-5680-1054-029-4 for a road project, McGinnis Ferry Road widening from Ronald Reagan Boulevard Union Hill Road to Hospital Parkway.
Second. Have a motion by Councilman Dorito and a second by Mayor Pro Tem Merkel. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the resolution of the mayor and council of the city of Alpharetta, Georgia, to authorize the use of eminent domain to acquire certain property located at 13000 Meridian Court, Alpharetta, Georgia, tax parcel number 21-5680-1054-029-4 for road project McGinnis Ferry Road widening from Ronald Reagan Boulevard, Union Hill Road to Hospital Parkway. All those in favor vote yes, otherwise vote no. And it does pass unanimously. Mr. Stacy, I believe you have the next.
A resolution of the mayor and council of the city of Alpharetta, Georgia, to authorize the use of eminent domain to acquire certain property located at 20 Fieldstone Way, Alpharetta, Georgia, tax parcel number 21-5690-100-107-0 for road project McGinnis Ferry Road widening from Ronald Reagan Boulevard / Union Hill Road to Hospital Parkway. Whereas the city of Alpharetta, the city, in conjunction with the city of Johns Creek and Forsyth County, has determined that it is necessary to construct a road project, which includes the widening of and construction of other operational improvements to a portion of McGinnis Ferry Road. Such road project being known as the McGinnis Ferry Road from Ronald Reagan Boulevard / Union Hill Road to Hospital Parkway project, and whereas in order to construct the project, it is necessary to acquire certain rights to, in, over, under, through, and across the property now or formerly owned by Quingway Liu, located at 20 Fieldstone Way, tax parcel number 21-5690-1100-107-0 within the city of Alpharetta, Georgia, reference project parcel 66B, as further described and shown in attachment A, attached here to and incorporated herein by this reference, and whereas the mayor and council have considered the project and determined that the project and the use of eminent domain to acquire those certain rights to and over, under, through, and across the foregoing property are necessary in the public interest and must be carried out expeditiously to ensure the timely completion of the project. Now, therefore, it is hereby resolved by the mayor and council of the city of Alpharetta, Georgia, as follows: for public road purposes and to meet the public necessity for immediately acquiring the subject property rights, which are hereby declared, the mayor and council authorize the city attorney's office to acquire through the use of eminent domain pursuant to Title 32 of the Official Code of Georgia, annotated the necessary property rights to and over, under, through, and across the property located at 20 Fieldstone Way, tax parcel number 21-5690-100-107-0 in order to ensure the timely completion of the project McGinnis Ferry Road from Ronald Reagan Boulevard / Union Hill Road to Hospital Parkway. Further, the mayor and the city administrator are specifically authorized to execute on behalf of and as if signed by every member of the governing authority of the city, the mayor and council, any and all documents necessary to further the filing of any petition for condemnation or declaration of taking related to the same and or in furtherance of this resolution.
Thanks, sir. Any questions from council? Ms. Shapiro, do we have any public comment cards?
We do not, sir.
But if there's anyone that would like to come forward and speak on this item, now is your chance. Seeing none, we'll close public comment. Do I have a motion from council?
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that council approve the resolution as read by City Attorney Stacy for use of eminent domain of 20 Fieldstone Way, also identified as tax parcel number 21-5690-100-107-0.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? Have a motion by Councilman Hypes, a second by Councilman Will, and that was for the resolution authorizing the use of eminent domain, 20 Fieldstone Way, a resolution of the mayor and council of the city of Alpharetta, Georgia, to authorize use of eminent domain to acquire certain property located at 20 Fieldstone Way, Alpharetta, Georgia, tax parcel number 21-5690-100-107-0 for road project McGinnis Ferry Road widening from Ronald Reagan Boulevard, Union Hill Road to Hospital Parkway. All those in favor, please vote yes. Otherwise, vote accordingly. It does pass unanimously. Mr. Stacy?
A resolution of the mayor and council of the city of Alpharetta, Georgia, to authorize the use of eminent domain to acquire certain property located at 40 Fieldstone Way, Alpharetta, Georgia, tax parcel number 21-5690-110-108-8 for road project McGinnis Ferry Road widening from Ronald Reagan Boulevard / Union Hill Road to Hospital Parkway. Whereas the city of Alpharetta, the city, in conjunction with the city of Johns Creek and Forsyth County, has determined that it is necessary to construct a road project, which includes the widening of and construction of other operational improvements to a portion of McGinnis Ferry Road. Such road project project being known as McGinnis Ferry Road from Ronald Reagan Boulevard / Union Hill Road to Hospital Parkway project, and whereas in order to construct the project, it is necessary to acquire certain rights to, in, over, under, through, and across the property now or formerly owned by Ricardo R. Victorio and Victoria P. Victorio, located at 40 Fieldstone Way, tax parcel number 21-5690-1100-108-8, within the city of Alpharetta, Georgia, reference project parcel 66A, is further described and shown in attachment A, attached hereto and incorporated herein by this reference, and whereas the mayor and council consider the project and determine that the project and the use of eminent domain to acquire those certain rights to, in, over, under, through, and across the foregoing property are necessary in the public interest and must be carried out expeditiously to ensure the timely completion of the project. Now, therefore, it is hereby resolved by the mayor and council of the city of Alpharetta, Georgia, as follows: for public road purposes and to meet the public necessity for immediately acquiring the subject property rights, which are hereby declared, the mayor and council authorize the city attorney's office to acquire through the use of eminent domain pursuant to Title 32 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated the necessary property rights to, in, over, under, through, and across the property located at 40 Fieldstone Way, tax parcel number 21-5690-1100-108-8, in order to ensure the timely completion of the project McGinnis Ferry Road from Ronald Reagan Boulevard / Union Hill Road to Hospital Parkway. Further, the mayor and city administrator are specifically authorized to execute on behalf of and is signed by every member of the governing authority of the city, the mayor and council, any and all documents necessary to further the filing of any petition for condemnation or declaration of taking related to the same and or in furtherance of this resolution.
Sorry, just so y'all know, it seems that the package that was distributed to council may have had a typographical error in misplacing this that wasn't in the package that was delivered to council. It is on the agenda as published and on the website. I was just trying to clarify where so I don't think there's any issue with this other than that it wasn't added into the 400-page package of information we get to study for these things. So just wanted to clarify that so y'all didn't wonder why we were whispering about it. Any questions about the resolution as read? Ms. Shapiro, do we have any public comment cards on this item?
We do not, sir.
But if anyone would like to come forward and speak on this matter, now's your chance to do so. Seeing no one, we'll close public comment. Do I have a motion from council?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor, I offer a motion to approve resolution to authorize the use of eminent domain at 40 Fieldstone Way as presented tonight by the city attorney, Mr. Stacy.
Second.
I have a motion by Mayor Pro Tem Merkel and a second by Councilman Dorito, and that was for resolution of the mayor and council of City of Alpharetta, Georgia, to authorize the use of eminent domain to acquire property located at 40 Fieldstone Way, Alpharetta, Georgia. Tax parcel number 21-5690-1100-108-8 for road project McGinnis Ferry Road widening from Ronald Reagan Boulevard, Union Hill Road to Hospital Parkway. All those in favor of the motion, please vote yes. Otherwise, vote no. And it does pass unanimously. Mr. Stacy, the next item, please.
A resolution of the mayor and council of the city of Alpharetta, Georgia, to authorize the use of eminent domain to acquire certain property located at 50 Fieldstone Way, Alpharetta, Georgia, tax parcel number 21-5690-1100-109-6 for road project McGinnis Ferry Road widening from Ronald Reagan Boulevard / Union Hill Road to Hospital Parkway, whereas the city of Alpharetta, the city, in conjunction with the city of Johns Creek and Forsyth County, has determined that it is necessary to construct a road project, which includes the widening of and construction of other operational improvements to a portion of McGinnis Ferry Road. Such road project being known as the McGinnis Ferry Road from Ronald Reagan Boulevard / Union Hill Road to Hospital Parkway project, the project. And whereas in order to construct the project, it is necessary to acquire certain rights to and over, under, through, and across the property now or formerly owned by Robert A. Harden and Katarina C. Harden, located at 50 Fieldstone Way, tax parcel number 21-5690-1100-109-6, within the city of Alpharetta, Georgia, reference project parcel 66, as further described and shown in attachment A attached hereto and incorporated herein by this reference. And whereas the mayor and council have considered the project and determined that the project and the use of eminent domain to acquire those certain rights to and over, under, through, and across the foregoing property are necessary in the public interest and must be carried out expeditiously to ensure the timely completion of the project. Now, therefore, it is hereby resolved by the mayor and council of the city of Alpharetta, Georgia, as follows: for public road purposes and to meet the public necessity for immediately acquiring the subject property rights, which are hereby declared, the mayor and council authorize the city attorney's office to acquire through the use of eminent domain pursuant to Title 32 of the official code of Georgia, annotated, the necessary property rights to and over, under, through, and across the property located at 50 Fieldstone Way, tax parcel number 21-5690-1100-109-6, in order to ensure the timely completion of the project, McGinnis Ferry Road from Ronald Reagan Boulevard / Union Hill Road to Hospital Parkway. Further, the mayor and the city administrator are specifically authorized to execute on behalf of and is signed by every member of the governing authority of the city, the mayor and council, any and all documents necessary to further the filing of any petition for condemnation or declaration of taking related to the same and or in furtherance of this resolution.
Thanks, sir. Ms. Shapiro, do we have any public comment cards on this item?
We do not, sir.
But if anyone would like to come forward and speak on this matter, now is your opportunity. Seeing none, we'll close public comment. Do I have a motion from council?
Mayor, I move to approve the resolution read by Michael Stacy to authorize the use of eminent domain to acquire certain property located at 50 Fieldstone Way, Alpharetta, Georgia, tax parcel number 21-5690-1100-109-6.
Second.
Had a motion by Councilman Dorito, and I believe Councilman Hypes beat Mayor Pro Tem Merkel to the punch for the second. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion to approve a resolution of the mayor and council of the city of Alpharetta, Georgia, to authorize the use of eminent domain to acquire certain property located at 50 Fieldstone Way, Alpharetta, Georgia, tax parcel ID number 21-5690-1100-109-6, for road project McGinnis Ferry Road widening from Ronald Reagan Boulevard, Union Hill Road to Hospital Parkway. All those in favor of the motion, please vote yes. Otherwise, vote accordingly. And it does pass unanimously. Mr. Stacy, I believe we have one more such resolution. Would you mind reading that, please?
Yes, sir. A resolution of the mayor and council of the city of Alpharetta, Georgia, to authorize the use of eminent domain to acquire certain property located at 6550 Fieldstone Way, Alpharetta, Georgia, tax parcel number 21-5690-1100-112-0 for road project McGinnis Ferry Road widening from Ronald Reagan Boulevard / Union Hill Road to Hospital Parkway. Whereas the city of Alpharetta, the city, in conjunction with the city of Johns Creek and Forsyth County, has determined that it is necessary to construct a road project which includes the widening of and construction of other operational improvements to a portion of McGinnis Ferry Road, such road project being known as the McGinnis Ferry Road from Ronald Reagan Boulevard / Union Hill Road to Hospital Parkway project, the project. And whereas in order to construct the project, it is necessary to acquire certain rights to and over, under, through, and across the property now or formerly owned by Niranjana Gundagati Raja Sahekra, located at 65 Fieldstone Way, tax parcel number 21-5690-1100-112-0 within the city of Alpharetta, Georgia, reference project parcel 68, and further described and shown in attachment A attached hereto and incorporated herein by this reference. And whereas the mayor and council have considered the project and determined that the project and the use of eminent domain to acquire those certain rights to and over, under, through, and across the foregoing property are necessary in the public interest and must be carried out expeditiously to ensure the timely completion of the project. Now, therefore, it is hereby resolved by the mayor and council of the city of Alpharetta, Georgia, as follows: for public road purposes and to meet the public necessity for immediately acquiring the subject property rights, which are hereby declared, the mayor and council authorize the city attorney's office to acquire the use of through the use of eminent domain pursuant to Title 32 of the official code of Georgia, annotated, the necessary property rights to and over, under, through, and across the property located at 65 Fieldstone Way, tax parcel number 21-5690-1100-112-0, in order to ensure the timely completion of the project McGinnis Ferry Road from Ronald Reagan Boulevard / Union Hill Road to Hospital Parkway. Further, the mayor and the city administrator are specifically authorized to execute on behalf of and as if signed by every member of the governing authority of the city, the mayor and council, any and all documents necessary to further the filing of any petition for condemnation or declaration of taking related to the same and or in furtherance of this resolution.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Shapiro, do we have any public comments cards on this item?
We do not, sir.
But if anyone would like to come forward and speak on the resolution authorizes use of eminent domain on 65 Fieldstone Way, now you have a chance. Seeing none, we'll close public comment. Do I have a motion from council on this item?
Yes, sir. I'd like to request a motion to approve the resolution for mayor and council of the city of Alpharetta for the property 65 Fieldstone Way, as read by our city attorney, Mike Stacy.
We have a motion by Councilman Mitchell and a second by Councilman Will. All those in favor of the motion to approve the resolution of the mayor and city council of Alpharetta, Georgia, to authorize use of eminent domain to acquire certain property located at 65 Fieldstone Way, Alpharetta, Georgia, tax parcel number 21-5690-1100-1120 for road project, McGinnis Ferry Road widening from Ronald Reagan Boulevard, Union Hill Road to Hospital Parkway. Please vote yes, otherwise vote no. And it does pass unanimously. That'll wrap up the new business portion of tonight's meeting. Next item will be workshops. And first item under workshops will be Brookside Small Area Plan. Director Cook, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This workshop is to discuss the Brookside Small Area Plan, area shown to you on the screen. And this was prepared as a result of input, just to remind you, that we received during the 2040 Horizon Comprehensive Land Use Plan. We just adopted that in October. And as part of that process, we actually sent out a survey to try to get input from the community on what are the top corridors and small area plans that they'd like to see staff focus on, and of course, City Council. And I think we had about 1,000 on the results of the survey. So we had about 1,000 people that responded, and they categorized their priorities. And then, of course, number one was North Point. Number two was the South Main Street, and we did apply for that LCI, and it's been awarded, so we'll be starting that planning process. And then the third corridor that they mentioned was Old Mountain Parkway, east of 400. So when we started looking at that area, we found that GDOT already had plans for the roadway, which included connecting sidewalks, but there wasn't a widening of the sidewalks. It was more or less connecting the sidewalks, and they're widening the roadway. So at that time, we focused on the 131 acres of Brookside. That was a plan that was actually adopted back in 1997. It's a master plan. But the reason that was so important is because, of course, there's a 42-acre site that Georgia State University occupies. There is one of our 14 different, green space parks. Brookside is located at that location. Also 1 million square feet of office that exists in commercial, and then there's also the master plan allows additional square footage that could be built. So we wanted to focus on this area, see if we can focus on creating an overlay as development is added, very similar to what we did at North Point, reducing some of the pavement. We spent the last year meeting with the community. There was a big public outreach process to this. We spoke to the HOAs, Park Brook last year, Glen Abbey, Pembroke, to try to find out, do what we think should be changed or added at this area. Does it match what the public thinks? So we got a lot of input. We also received a lot of input from Georgia State, as well as the office owners, high-res. We had a lot of walking tours in the area. We also spoke to the brokers as well as the property owners. And it was a continuous feedback loop is what we'll call it, because we got the comments, put the plan together, and then we had to go back out. We found that some of our ideas were not well received to the business owners. So we went back and changed that. And Ben Kern in our office has done a phenomenal job, and I'm going to let him take the plan away, and this is just to get input before we finalize everything. Thank you.
Yeah, good evening, Mayor and Council. It's a pleasure to be here to discuss some of this plan and this process with you tonight. This is a few pages that are taken out of the plan that we'll spend a couple minutes to just touch on a few of the main themes, and then get any feedback or questions you guys may have. So this is a breakdown of the master plan viewed in the 4 pods that it's broken out in. These pods vary a little bit in the entitlement, size of building, character. Pod D obviously is along Old Mountain Parkway and is constituted primarily by the retail and restaurants as seen from Old Mountain Parkway, whereas Pod A, B, and C are more office-oriented, with Pod A containing Georgia State and some of the bigger Class A office, and Pod B and C is more of the 1- and 2-story office buildings out there currently. The master plan was approved in 1997. If we take a glance back 20 years ago, you'll see that the biggest growth spurt for this area was in between when it was approved in 1997 and early 2000s. Most of the buildings were built out at that point, with a few remaining sites that have been filled in through the years. We wanted to look at some of the natural amenities that are out in the area currently. One of really the hidden gems of Alpharetta, I think, is Brookside Trail, which is over 2 miles of continuous paved trail. It is only 5 feet, and there's areas that aren't maintained. It deviates from city-owned property to private property, but it's on the other side of the Big Creek Greenway. It does not include the Big Creek Greenway, but it's very close in proximity, and it has several connection points throughout the district. But it's a very natural area. Goes through some woodlands and along some water features that are quite nice. There's also a 30-acre piece of land that the city owns that we're calling Brookside Park. You can see the walking trails meander around this lake feature and then continue on throughout the district. It blends with Brookside 1 and 2, so it's hard to know where that property that the city owns starts and where the private property ends, but that is an asset out there that's worth further exploration. In terms of setbacks, we examined what some of the existing distances from the road of certain buildings. You can see it varies anywhere from about 30 feet to several hundred feet. And obviously not wanting to change any of the layout of the buildings out there, but if there were to be new buildings, we're examining maybe a closer setback, obviously something not like downtown, but provides more of that area of passage and fills in some of the area between the arterial roadways and current buildings, just to fill in the space there and look at the configuration of buildings within the district. We worked with Kimley Horn, our consultant, who helped us draw up this framework plan. This is a very loose idea for green infrastructure, as well as connections and intersections that are worth exploring further based on all the feedback we got from both residents and the businesses out there. So again, this is a very high-level look at what could be in areas that, if future investment were given from private or public, where the biggest impact could be. They did a streetscape rendering of Brookside Parkway. The current existing condition is a 4-lane roadway that does see some traffic, but kind of on peak hours during Georgia State and off times for office. But other than that, it's a lot of pavement, which offers potential for restriping and streetscape improvements if desired. And we got pretty good feedback on what the bottom rendering could do for that area. And then we talked about intersection enhancements, particularly crossing Old Mountain Parkway. There's a good bit of residential on the north side of Old Mountain Parkway that people were interested in connecting over to this district using some of those main intersections. We took their initial concept and framework plan and took some of our research into who's out there currently and built some layers of different themes within the district and ways for unique nuance in terms of the character of what's out there. There's a corporate area as you enter, right off of, on the far west side of the plan, with some existing Class A office buildings and corporate tenants, followed by Georgia State's 2 buildings, and they have an undeveloped parcel out there as well that we foresaw as a expanded GSU campus, essentially. And then we were surprised to find the level of momentum for the gaming industry, not just high-res, but there were several other gaming companies to the east side of the district who were renting out space, both for production as well as game development. And we threw out a few ideas about how do we build off of that momentum that's already there in unique ways that helps us both economically and the vibrancy of the district. And that's all knitted together by this green envelope that's made up primarily of the trail system that's out there. These are just some inspiration images for looking at the Georgia State campus. In the upper right, you can see it's a lot of parking lot currently in a couple buildings, but we envisioned if there was reinvestment from the university, they could do a lot with turning some of those spaces into lawns and giving more of a campus feel with some imagery that looks at that. And then we looked at a couple examples around the U.S. of built-up places that repurposed parking lots and they turned into vibrant plazas, just as an idea exercise for what could be. And then lastly, we have a short-term action plan that our consultants, Kimley Horn, are working on cost estimates for the Brookside streetscape, as well as intersection improvements, and then the Brookside Park, primarily signage and wayfinding and things that attract people and give recognition to that park. So they're working on those and trying to develop some costs for future planning that will help with retrieving and going after grant funding for some of these projects. So with that, that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have any. Thank you.
Any questions for Ben at this time? No? So this is a workshop, so it's not a business item. We won't be voting on anything tonight. This is just an opportunity for us to talk about what's being researched, what's being proposed. So if you have any feedback, any direction you'd like to give our staff at this time, whether you like things or don't like. Councilman Dorito?
Yeah, Ben, thank you for the presentation, Kathy. This is exciting to see what the future of this area of the city might become. I have a question that, because I don't know enough about it, the gaming section. Could you explain that a little bit more? What are they doing and plan to do in the future there, potentially?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question because I was in your seat not too long ago, and I've learned a lot in a little bit of time. One of the biggest points of feedback from the commercial stakeholders was high-res studios, who they produce a couple games. One of them is called Smite. It's pretty well known, and they brought us out to the site to look at some of the green space recommendations, and ended up giving us a pretty in-depth tour of their campus. And they actually have 2 buildings. The one right in the middle, the long, thin white one, they have been renting out as a game development office. So it's an office space. You've got people with computers, they're in software, there's fun figurines of the different folks. So a lot of them are in the zone. They're creating games. And then they actually lease out a space about a couple hundred yards down the road where it's a full-blown studio where they have, they told us that because of higher ceilings, they're able to put camera equipment, and it was almost like going into like an ESPN broadcasting studio. They had a camera panning around 2 guys at a desk giving commentary, and then they had teams actually in the back playing with referees. I mean, it's a full operation there, and they have a lot of expensive equipment that they're, creating production that's being watched all over the world, really. So you kind of have 2 sides of the coin in the gaming industry with that company. And then from what we understand, there's a couple other buildings where it's more of the development side of gaming, the back-end software stuff going on. So it's really interesting when we put together this concept of the possible esports tourism. we had found out that a lot of the teams that come in and play are staying in hotels nearby, sometimes for varied periods of time. And we had no idea that company was supporting several different local hotels and busing people to and fro during the day. So it really got us curious how that industry is promoting tourism and how we might be able to further that.
It's very interesting. And I just have one other question on the Brookside Park that this property the city owns, around that, I guess, water feature, I'll call it. I mean, it's not like, it's dirt trails, right, back there?
It's actually paved. It is
paved, but
It's
5
feet,
feet, you
yes,
said?
sir.
Does it get utilized much?
It does. I've personally been back there several times, and I've usually always seen at least one or two others. I understand that it's really the people who work in the office vicinity of Brookside or the neighborhood that it connects to. Those are the primary users. Outside of that, most people don't know about it.
Do you know what neighborhood it connects to? Is it Park Brook? Is it Glen Abbey?
Yes. It's it is down in the bottom right. I believe that is Park Brook. Yeah, Park Brook.
Park Brook.
At their
I'm very
tennis
familiar. I
court.
used to live there for 20-something years, and
Okay.
I'm very familiar with the dirt path out the back of the subdivision there. I always wondered if it could ever be connected to the Greenway or something, but I know
Okay.
at least last time I was there.
Yeah, it's right at the tennis courts.
Yeah, okay.
It's
Yeah, the lower
paved
tennis courts.
now, and that continues, but there's no signage. It just kind of, it goes off into the woods. And
But it's not something that's like our Greenway that's maintained daily by the city, isn't it? It's
exactly, no, it doesn't.
So it has great potential, is my point. I mean, as part of this overlay plan, possibly.
Absolutely,
Connecting
yes.
it to the Greenway, correct?
Yeah, and connecting to the Greenway, it's only a few feet from the Greenway. It's separated by Big Creek, but a lot of people use the North Point Church Bridge. It's right at that point
Yep.
where you can connect over very easily, so.
Know where that is? Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Councilman Binder?
Thanks. This is a good write-up. Is there anything you specifically need from us for comments or on design or?
No, I think this is just a high-level talking points. Yeah, as far as I know, we're just kind of presenting everything that we've come across at this point, and waiting to hear any kind of feedback you guys may have.
So then, what would be the next steps?
Ben is right. And we're just, before we started getting the cost estimates and prioritizing projects, we wanted to make sure that the council saw the plan and make sure that we received any feedback before we go the next steps.
I'll be interested once we get costing on it. So Kemley Horn, they're going to come back with, what's their package going to look like?
We gave them, we worked with them on part of this project, but their other task was to come back with the actual cost estimates. So we have a lot of projects that we're showing, like the streetscape project. They're going to be putting the pricing together for that, the different pedestrian connection upgrades. So we'll be able to have give the council our priorities and then hear back from you, of course, and then go forward with what the council wants to go forward with.
The streetscape, is that going to fall in line with what GDOT's doing or planning to do with Old Milton? Or-
No, GDOT, we had thought we could get additional upgrades on the GDOT plans on Old Milton. However, those plans, they're already designed, is my understanding. So they're right now just planning to do 5-foot sidewalks.
Yeah.
In connecting existing sidewalks. So that's when we kind of turned our attention to how can we get better intersection improvements and then look at this area.
That's what I was wondering on the streetscape. Just want to make sure that we're not designing something that's already kind of
Right.
in pen.
Right, and we made sure, that we looked at the connectivity. Even though it is the 5-foot sidewalks, at least it will have those connections along Old Milton Parkway.
And then when they're doing the costing, are we going to look at potential funding sources? I know your group's gotten very good at hunting for grants and other opportunities that maybe we haven't looked at in the past few years.
We will, and there's actually a kind of a beginner phase, a stage one for, can you put it on the road? which is actually, you can see from the plan, it takes out a lane, similar to what we're looking at on North Point Parkway. So there's a way to set that up as a temporary, stage one that's a little bit cheaper, and then go into the next phase, which would be more construction. So we'll have pricing for both of those.
Okay. That'd be good. I try to hold my feelings close to the vest until I see the price tag. So interested in hearing more about that before we start throwing in more on design plans and that, but it's definitely a feasible project. So good work.
Thank you.
Councilman Hypes.
Well, appreciate seeing all these forward-looking ideas. I know the area very well. Had my office over there in Brookside, too, for 9 years, overlooking the lake and the terrace. It's beautiful. It's got some natural attraction for future tenants. The problem that we had when we were over there is it is, entirely car dependent. If you didn't eat at the old Four Seasons, which is now Link, or the $3 cafe across the street, you were going to drive to lunch pretty much. And so it's also one of the biggest contiguous asphalt areas probably in all of Alpharetta when you throw in Georgia State next to the Brookside. Are the businesses that are there within this footprint, are they willing to get more restaurants and things that are walkable and to trade some asphalt for some amenities? Is that part of the mix?
Well, I think that's important to all of the business owners there, and even Georgia State. So they said that when they had some surveys with the students, and they, of course, said that they would stay longer if there was a central gathering space as well as some restaurants for the students. And they have additional land there. So it's kind of right now, getting everybody's priorities together, and that is something that Georgia State wants to see, additional restaurants. But when you talk to some of the restaurants, they want it to appear more walkable. So, they're looking to see which part of the plan, if any, that the city goes forward with. They're also looking for us to make changes to the setbacks. So the setbacks are, 65 feet, and if we put an overlay together, they would have setbacks where it pushes the buildings closer to the road, require fewer parking spaces. So I think things like that, very similar to what we did at North Point, creating that overlay, will attract additional business.
On the western end, where the bulk of the parking is, assuming full occupancy, and I understand occupancy is a challenge right now, but assuming full occupancy, isn't there way more than enough parking spots in all that asphalt that's out there?
Yes, definitely. And what we also found, it was so interesting, when we spoke to Hi-Res and some of the other businesses, they said a large majority of their employees are bicycling to work. There's a lot of residential across the street, so a lot of the focus too is tying the residential over to where they feel safe biking.
Well, I don't mean to be sound pessimistic, but unless the mix gets changed, it will still be a car-dependent area with walking trails, which are a great amenity and will make the leasing of the offices more attractive in that respect. But as somebody who had an office there, we were attracted to move downtown so that we could walk to restaurants and businesses. And so I hope that can get addressed in this plan in some fashion, and that the owners of these properties buy into that.
Absolutely.
Councilman Will.
Two questions, really. And my first one is, why this project? And I'm asking the question in terms of, is this just a continuation of the things that we're looking to do for the future of Alpharetta and it's next in line, or is there something else that's driving this project right now?
Sure.
That's my first question.
It's part of the comprehensive land use plan, the project that we went through with the adoption last year. The first thing that we did, actually we started in 2020, is a survey to the public to say what areas should the city be looking at and focusing on to change the character, make it more walkable, And this was in the top three. So number one was North Point, which we've gone forward and put that overlay together. And then the second one was South Main Street, which we applied and we were approved for the LCI. We awarded that. So this is just, it's in the top three.
So it's next up.
Yes.
Okay. And my second question, in the staff report I think I was looking at, talks about the ability to apply for grants, and I think Jason asked the question as well. I assume at some point you're going to come back and say, hey, by the way, city, we need $50 million, and this is how we're going to phase it out, and we have to figure out where to come up with that money?
Yeah, so our plan is to come back with those, the cost of the projects, and then if council's in agreement with the projects, then we will look for grants and ways to pay for those projects. The other thing that we'll do is actually develop an overlay that's changes to the zoning code, a Brookside overlay, similar to what we did at North Point, to where the setbacks are changed, the parking is reduced. And you can see it did attract more development at North Point, because we've had buildings, if you look at the corner of Haynes and North Point, where they've torn down the old buildings and built new buildings close to the street with the wider sidewalks, fewer parking spaces that are required. So very similar on the planning style for that.
And if I could just elaborate, so over the past few years, one of the reasons this has become a priority is because our occupancy levels in the office spaces have decreased dramatically with COVID. A couple of years ago, right before COVID hit, I was in one of those office buildings by the park, looking over the pond for the grand opening of Zoom's first East Coast facility. And they had renovated one of those buildings, and it was packed, and they were expanding. And COVID hit about 3 months later. And it's, even though they probably still are on the hook for the lease, there's no one in that building for Zoom now, because they're all Zooming. And so as Kathy and her staff over the past 2 years specifically, you know, for those of you who may not know, prior to COVID, the city of Alpharetta had about 60,000 additional people come into our community every day. That's what gives us the amenities that we have that most cities of 65,000 nighttime population don't have. You get the types of things like Avalon and Topgolf and North Point Mall from having that influx of daytime population. And so without those 60,000 people coming in every day, now we're probably, rough estimates, 30, 40%. So, you know, that's still tens of thousands of people who aren't coming into our community and patronizing our restaurants and our hotels and our small businesses. And so as staff started looking at ways that we can make these older complexes that are more of a traditional style more attractive to the new tenants, because our community is very attractive to employers. They're always knocking on our doors looking for opportunities. But the product that was built there really wasn't built for walkability. We didn't tie the amenities to it. For example, as Councilman Dorito was asking the questions about that park, I think Pete had put together an estimate of $800,000 to connect that park and the pond to the greenway, the bridge. Do you remember? Yeah, just the bridge connection. I'm not going to hold it to it. I was just saying, I mean, it wasn't like $3 million to build a bridge or something like that. And one of the things that I see is Kathy was showing some of those streetscapes is, as we just did earlier in the meeting when we had, you know, try to acquire the right-of-way with perhaps condemnation or whatever, the designs that they're showing here, we actually own that right-of-way already because we've got extra lanes there. So a lot of that wouldn't be as expensive as some of the other projects revising it.
And those are good points, and what we didn't include in this presentation is that there's 30% vacancy, and the 10-year average for office was 19%. So it does have a higher, that's another reason, of course, to focus on this area.
Councilman Drew.
I just thought of something I wanted to just throw out as you're going through the planning on this overlay. I know that Old Mountain Parkway corridor is going to go through expansion, right? Adding 2 lanes? One lane. What's the timing of that, Pete? Just, is that soon, or is that? And let me tell you why I'm bringing this up, why he's walking up to the mic. Could we, like, is there any coordination with GDOT, with the expansion on Mountain Parkway, to make those sidewalks along the corridor safer for people to either ride bikes or, you know, is there going to be any built into the plan some sense of being able to, as Councilman Hypes talked about earlier, be able to get other places in the city without feeling unsafe? Because that's a very heavily used corridor. And frankly, I always drive down there, people driving down there, and you have one accident, crashing into somebody on the sidewalk. I could see that happening. So people tend not to walk along there if they can avoid it, is my point. So I wonder if that's, and are you giving any consideration to incorporating that into the plan with GDOT and the overlay for Brookside?
So for the GDOT plan, the answer is no. We're not incorporating additional sidewalks. We're connecting gaps, primarily for two reasons. One, the additional expense for the right-of-way that would have to be obtained, and two, the timing and the length of the process it would take us. So we are widening to the inside where the median is, adding landscape in there, and GDOT is going to fund the construction of that aspect at a tune of approximately $25 million.
Okay, thank you.
But your point is well taken, Councilman Dorito. We did contemplate that. We actually had plans drawn that showed that. But with the cost of commercial property values along that corridor, 48,000 cars a day go by there, and that makes right-of-way acquisition very pricey. And so we had to scale it back down to something that we could afford at this time. Perhaps if the corridor does redevelop, then we might be able to incorporate some of that, because I do believe that that corridor, once we have better transportation flows through there, and if we make it even more attractive to walkability and things, there may be opportunities to even change some of the redevelopment of those strip shopping centers and things into something. And as that redevelops, it may give us opportunities to piece together more walkability.
This could be the catalyst for that whole area.
Councilman Merkel, or Mayor Pro Tem Merkel.
Yeah, if you look at that picture, I think it's still up over there. This one's not working. In those discussions about North Point Parkway and not real walkability, that was the driver behind what you're looking at in this picture here, which is then if you're going to bring the bikes and walking and jogging people, you bring them into the interior section, and they can get all the way down there without playing Frogger.
Any other feedback for staff? Thanks, guys. You did a great job. Look forward to trying to get this thing implemented piece by piece. That's what it takes. Next item up is workshop for the city stormwater inventory assessment. Director Sisevich.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is the first of two workshops on stormwater. I'm looking at the macro view of it. Take a page from my consumer economics class at school, and then in the later workshop we do more of a micro look into a specific area in the city. So over the last 5-6+ years, the city of Alpharetta has hired a consultant to inspect 20% of our stormwater system every year. When the consultant finds an issue, if it's a serious issue, we get called right away. If it's not as serious, like the road's not going to collapse or anything, we put the work into our work order system. Let's have a collection over the years. We have thousands of stormwater work orders, from cleaning out a catch basin to replacing a pipe that is not in jeopardy of failing, to unwinding a pipe, etc. And through the years, we basically estimated what we thought the cost would be on an annual basis to do that, and we do that through historical data. Last budget cycle, council awarded dollars for us to hire a consultant to go through our data, go through our work that we see that we have allocated, and come up with a cost estimate. And what you have in front of you is that cost estimate broken down into several categories. And the biggest line item, $19 million roughly, is the replacement of structure pipes throughout the city. These are not pipes that are in jeopardy of failing. If they were in jeopardy of failing, they'd be being worked on and budgeted so we can move forward. These pipes are also broken down into tiers. We have 4 tiers that we go with. Tier 1 is the most severe. You are sitting 10 feet or so from a structure, or you are underneath the pavement of a cul-de-sac subdivision, and the pipe is right in the front of the subdivision. So a good example of that's Claremont subdivision off of Cumming Street. If the pipe right in front of Claremont would fail, the road would fail, no one could get to their house. So that is tier 1 priority. And it goes down from there. We also included stormwater projects in our parks that we own. And this is all city-maintained infrastructure. So when I say city-maintained, I'm not looking at, HOA detention ponds. I'm not looking at catch basins that are on private property. This is all catch basin structures, head walls, pipes that the city is responsible for maintaining per our extent of service agreement. There's over $7 million worth of park upgrades. The next line item is we call it Trenchless Rehabilitation or pipelining, as you heard me say several months ago. That is the one that we like to go with if we can. It's a fraction of the cost, and you can see that with all the linear feet of pipe that we have in the work order system and the cost compared to a replacement of a pipe and the cost. And then the consultant looked at 5 to 10 years down the line. Like, okay, what are we looking at, at year 6 or year 7 from now, and what do they project? That's more of the estimate than we're going based off of criteria of a scoring system. So if it's going to degrade a little bit over time, we know by year 9, we might have to line that pipe or maybe even replace that pipe. And then we have the structure replacement for the same thing, time frame. And then the last 2 items are our inspections that we have to do, as well for regulatory compliance, as well as our the BMP, which is best management practice. For our detention ponds. And our detention pond maintenance is low due to staff going out there and taking care of it as they progress. So we don't have a massive cleanup to do. We could just, like the big detention pond in the back of Public Works, we just go back out there and mow it on a dry day. So same thing we do with the parks. So it's minimal maintenance because we keep doing it. And that's the reason why that number is as low as it is. That all comes up to a grand total of just shy of $42 million. We rounded it up to about $4.2 million over a 10-year period. So that's the big picture, what we're looking. I think we projected earlier this year at the retreat, or last year, I think it was like at $4.9 million was our estimate. So hiring the consultant helped us out greatly.
Thank you, Pete. Any questions? Councilman Will.
You said the first one was broken down into 4 tiers, 1 being critical, immediate, 4 being not, of the 19 million, but I don't see a breakdown of what those tiers are.
I could get you that information.
Okay, so my second question would be, do we have critical infrastructure that, in the case of the Claremont subdivision, could break tomorrow and we leave all those people stranded?
No, sir.
We do not. Okay. That was it. Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Councilman Dreedy.
Yeah, Pete, thank you very much for presenting tonight. Obviously, I've been through this with you, and the mayor and other council members have gone through this in detail, but I just had a couple of kind of follow-up questions since we spoke. To make it clear, this is for existing 125 miles of the city stormwater system that we maintain. It has nothing to do with any additions or anything that happens with new construction that the city may take over some culverts or whatever in the future. This is existing infrastructure that the assessment is telling us that over the next 10 years, assuming we do it over 10 years, it comes to about $4.2 million a year that the city council needs to consider whether they want to appropriate those monies or not annually, correct? All right. What happens with new construction where deeded streets are deeded over to the city at the completion of construction? Does those culverts and stormwater piping become the city's assets?
So if it's a public subdivision with public streets, the answer is yes.
So like my subdivision, the Braden, it's transferring over to the city, contract is done. The city is, I think, currently the responsibility of the city. So anything stormwater related now becomes the city's assets to maintain, correct?
For those assets, correct. And what we do is we'll go out and we just recently finished a project where we'll go out and play catch up.
Okay.
Subdivisions that were built over the last 3 or 4 years, we'll go out in the field and we will collect the data in the field. We'll identify where the catch basin is, what size pipe it is, what the inverts are, and then enter that in our GIS system. When it becomes a private subdivision, I'll use the closest one here is Academy Park that we've been working with. Those are all privately maintained. So they are responsible through their HOA to repair their pipes, repair their catch basin, repair their roads, et cetera.
Okay. The other thing I just want to kind of put on the record is that the city has, despite the, now I'll exclude the period of the pandemic, because I know that past city councils reduced the budget on annual maintenance and that for good reason. What do we invest as a city each year in stormwater management maintenance? About 1.5 to 1.7 on average?
I believe that's
Is in the capital budget?
I believe that's an accurate number. This past year, I think, was a little higher due to some funding that we received from the state.
So if we were to basically follow the recommendations of the stormwater assessment summary, we would have to increase that to 4.2 annually, assuming the council decides to appropriate those monies or a portion of them, what have you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Will?
Just to clarify, Councilman Dorito said we're spending 1.7, roughly, approximately. And you're saying it takes 4.2 to make all these corrections. Is the 1.7 straight maintenance and the 4.2 is on top of that to make the corrections? Or is the 1.7 part of the 4.2 that we need to spend?
So we have the 1.7, which is predominantly, which is basically is all maintenance.
Okay.
We see a work order, we get something that comes in. For example, there was one the other day that comes in that there was a catch basin that was settling. So we'll go out, we'll inspect and see what's going on and prioritize that one based off the need that comes in. The 4.2 million includes some of the projects in the parks that we've allocated, like there's a stream restoration project like at Wills Park and at Webbridge Park. There's some work there. But predominantly we're doing is we are resolving the issues in the field on the existing infrastructure. So we're either going to replace a pipe, replace a catch basin, line a pipe, clean out a catch basin. There isn't any grandiose plan of.
So to be clear, it's 5.9 per year.
No, it's still at 4.2. We're still includes it at 1.7.
So it's the 4.2 includes the 1.7?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Mitchell?
A lot of this has to do with our current stormwater system. But in areas of the city, we know that it's failing certain residents because either we need more detention ponds, we need to implement some other things there to catch some of the flooding that's going on during these storms. My own neighborhood, which does not have an HOA, and many of these neighborhoods don't have an HOA, when it rains just like over the weekend, I mean, I'm on septic tanks still because the sewer was not put in. I mean, the sinks won't drain properly because the water table is so high. And so what are we doing to assess that? And then I think we as a city need to be looking at a stormwater fee, just like all of our surrounding communities, because this 19 million comes nowhere close to correcting some of these problems for existing neighborhoods that have been here from the 60s and 70s and built during those times when there weren't clear stormwater guidelines that the city had to follow or that was mandated by the state or federal government. Now that's different, but we've got a lot of catch-up work, and I find it difficult to talk about this without talking about what we're going to do to rectify some of these age-old problems around the city.
So those areas that you mentioned would be on top of this number here.
Correct.
And that's why we'll be discussing them in a separate workshop next.
Yeah.
Councilman Binder?
So to clarify, we're good. I'm just looking over the 4.2, what we're currently spending, the approximately 2 million or 1.7 is part of the 4.2. So the delta's just that difference of what we have.
Yes, sir.
So action items for this workshop of moving forward, what do you need from us to?
I think it'll be a discussion through the budget process with
Money.
Yeah, I mean, quite frankly,
this is more of an
I've
information.
been on this council 10 years. I think we were spending $800,000 10 years ago. I mean, what it takes is a dedicated city council that's going to spend $4.2 million a year on the stormwater. There's always something that's, forgive the term, sexier, something that's more attractive, that's more appealing to the public in general. But that's the issue is, are we going to spend $4.2 million on that during budget crunches?
So what I'd like to say is probably from the same thing I said at the last workshop that we just heard here is I would personally like to explore revenue sources in different ways to pay for this because it takes dedication, but it takes a little bit of reality too. And, you know, is it feasible? So working with finance of saying, okay, what would it take for the 4.2 within our current avenues that we have, or addressing additional avenues, and then bring that forward to council, and then we can have a go, no go, but give amongst the 7 of us who have been elected here to make decisions to say, how are we going to do it, or can we, you know, are we going to prioritize it within our current model or add other ones or that? But I don't know what the solution is, but we need to make decisions as elected leaders. So
I'll work with Tom and
so
finance.
I'd like to see the options on our plate and then say, okay, how are we going to do this? So it doesn't really matter to me how we get there. I want to get there, and I want it to be from the same hymnal.
Understood.
All right.
Councilman Dorito?
Thank you, Mayor. I concur with Councilman Mitchell and Councilman Binder of their concerns about the stormwater issues we have around the city. And I wasn't going to talk about this till the next section, but since it's being brought up, I think it's important for me to kind of air my concerns. Since I joined council, the mayor, asked me to be liaison to Public Works, and I've been working closely with your department, Pete, and I know Councilman Hypes has been involved as well from the Parks and Rec side because it affects some of our greenways and things, stormwater management. Let's be perfectly honest. We have some serious stormwater issues in the city that has to be addressed. But I also want to be perfectly transparent to our residents that we represent that some of the complexities that this council has to deal with, it's not so simple to say, hey, let's just go ahead and address all these issues. There's a funding question. There's issues of dealing through the Army Corps of Engineers and the Environmental Protection Agency to get permits and access and things to address. There's things outside our control as a council. We could put $500 million toward this problem, but it's outside the city too that's feeding into our stormwater system, our creeks, which is exacerbating the problem for Alpharetta. So we need the county to be a partner in this. We need the state EPA to be a partner in this. A lot of this is going to take some time. But I do think this council is prepared to move forward and start addressing this in much more formidable ways. As the mayor alluded to, we've been, allocating funds in previous councils to kind of just maintain the stormwater system as best as we can within the confines of what the taxpayers give us to appropriate for other needs of the city as well. So, we're sitting here tonight talking about this because a lot of us have been actively involved, at least since I've been on the council, discussing this and wanting to create solutions. And I think you'll see in the next workshop item that, staff has done a great job in preparing to start helping this council move forward and address solutions. We have to deal with the private property issue. We have to be very careful with that. That's another problem that we need to consider and how we address this issue. And I think, the next workshop item is probably the worst part of the city that we have addressed. And I think, so this doesn't turn into we got to address every stormwater issue in the city. I think we have to start addressing the problems, not only stormwater, but, what's getting into our creeks, that's basically contamination and things, and how do we address those issues? How do we have a program to actually dredge our creek beds to create a better stormwater flow? How do we, and I think Councilman Mitchell, you alluded to this, do we put more detention ponds around the city? Do we put more requirements on future development, which I absolutely think so, and some of the recommendations that I think Kathy Cook's going to talk about here shortly. Staff is already working on that. So there's many aspects and tentacles leading into what this solution is for the city, both short-term, mid-term, and long-term. And so my whole point is this is a very complex problem. I don't know what's been done in the past, and no pun intended, but that's water under the bridge, right? We need to fix this going forward, and I think this council is prepared to do that.
Councilman Will.
Councilman Mitchell alluded to this earlier, sorry, Councilman Mitchell alluded to this earlier, and I wanted to see if this is an appropriate time to address the fact that we're looking at $42 million plus some of the things that he talked about. Is this the appropriate time to talk about potentially looking at the option of a stormwater fee, which every other city around us has?
I'd prefer us to get through these two workshops. I mean, I think that's the intention of this process is we haven't prepared any information for that. I think we wanted to get an overall assessment of the issues we were facing, give the public an opportunity to hear the challenges we're facing, and then begin a public process about actually how we fund them. Councilman Binder, did you say you had another question? Okay. I thought I saw a motion over there that was asking for my attention. I appreciate it. Pete, refresh my memory if you could. Do we even charge impact fees for stormwater?
I'm going to lean on Tom to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the answer is no.
I think so too. Is it available, Tom?
I think it's parks, streets.
Correct. If you don't mind, for the public record, sorry to make you walk up there for that. And for those of you that aren't aware while he's walking up, impact fees are fees that are charged for new developments. It's something that's mandated or regulated by the state, so it's not something we can control completely on a local level. There are certain criteria and things like that. But Tom, if you don't mind explaining what those are and how that could be applied.
Currently, we have 3 impact fees on new development, and it's because their development is going to be putting on, or we need to come up with new capacity on the roads, public safety, and parks. We do have the available option under the law to impose one on, implement an impact fee on stormwater as well, but it would not be necessarily to fix previous issues, but to deal with the capacity issues that they're bringing to the table. That helps.
Great. That helps. So like I said, I couldn't even recall. I know we've discussed it in the past, but I wanted to make sure that that was still something that was available to us at this time if we chose to. Thank you. I appreciate that. Any other discussion, input from council? All right, Pete. Appreciate you getting us a good number, one we feel somewhat confident in as long as costs don't continue to skyrocket. So that'll wrap up the City Stormwater Inventory Assessment Workshop. Third item on the workshops this evening will be the Meadowbrook Hills, Milton Estate Stormwater and Drainage issues. There he is. I was looking around for James. James Drinker, do you have this item?
Mayor and Council, as Pete alluded to, we've taken a look at kind of a citywide look, but now we want to dive a little deeper into this specific area of the city. And as we begin, I'll go ahead and point out, so in this area, there's 2 platted subdivisions, and that's what I used in my title, Meadowbrook Hills and Milton Estates. There's actually another piece or another name that a portion of this is referred to, which is Milton Glen. It's not an actual platted subdivision, but it is an area within this that is referred to by residents. And I overlooked that because I was working from plats. So if anybody's here who lives in the area that they refer to as Milton Glen, my apologies for not referencing you specifically. But as has been alluded to, we are seeing heightened stormwater issues in this area. Now, part of that, and there's a myriad of reasons that go into it, and the white paper that is part of your packet was also sent to a distribution list within the neighborhood that came from a meeting that was held back on February 8th. So we wanted to get that in the hands of the residents impacted by tonight's discussion, so they had a chance to look at it as well. So I'm going to kind of skim through some of the background and current conditions and spend most of our time on kind of the path forward. It's not much we can do about the past, plenty that we can do as we look forward. But for those of you not familiar with this neighborhood or area, construction development started in the phases that we're primarily talking about around 1984. There were some allowances and determinations made by FEMA to reduce the risk category that some areas were in, and based on that, the development was allowed to move forward.
Now, if I could just pause you, because this was a striking point to me as I read through this report.
Certainly.
So before this property was developed, if I read it correctly, it was determined by FEMA that this, a large portion of this area was in a 100-year floodplain.
Correct. So along Folk Hiller Creek and along the tributary, there's areas that are designated and were designated at the time as being within that floodplain area. Floodplain is assessed at varying risk levels, and some of those classifications have changed over time. But the risk level, because of some plans that were introduced by the developer, that risk level was lowered. FEMA agreed to that. They agreed to the changes to the creek bed.
Do you have those plans?
I do not have, let's see. It is, yeah, there's a rough slide in there.
I just think it's important. I know you wanted to focus mostly on the solutions and things like that, but it was very informative for me. I think it's all important for us as we have these conversations to understand how we got to this place in the first place.
So this is not really what I'd call a plan. It's a good sketch that was part of an engineer's study from 1983. But basically the concept was to change the profile of the creek. And that would allow for the lowering of the risk category. And I will preface everything from this point, and I should have said this from the start. I want to make clear what kind of my role is in all of this. Obviously, I'm not the city's stormwater expert. My task was to take the varying perspectives from staff, because both our community development department and our public works department address stormwater from different perspectives and in different ways. So my task is to coordinate those efforts and to try to take what our technical experts know and brought to the table and put that into terminology that could be generally understood. I think the game plan was if I could understand it, pretty much anybody could, or at least that's what Pete told me. So as we dive into this, I'm sure you're going to have some technical questions. Pete and Kathy are both here to help. And if all of us get into a bind, then we're going to go to our closer, Ms. Bazinet, who is our resident stormwater expert, and will make all of us look like we don't have a clue what we're talking about. But so basically the idea was to change the profile of the creek, change the capacity of the creek, such that the risk profile for those homes that were proposed to be developed in those floodplains would be reduced. FEMA agreed to that. FEMA reduced that risk category, issued a letter in 1984, and based on that letter, the city allowed the development to move forward.
Thank you for explaining that, because that was the first time I had heard that when staff brought this to my attention in the report that's available to all of you here. It was always perplexing to me when I look at the current floodplain and how this happened. And basically, from the record, it seems that the developer showed this diagram of what was going to be done with the creek and would be maintained in perpetuity to keep those homes from being in a floodplain. And FEMA adjusted accordingly, and apparently the city staff back in 1984 accepted that and allowed that development to take place. So that's the basis of a lot of the challenges we face right now. Doesn't change the fact that we have an issue, but it was insightful to me to understand how we got to this point, and that was a critical juncture from my perspective.
Right. And it's important to understand, too, as we're thinking about that it impacts a portion of the homes, not all of the homes in those two neighborhoods. Now, if you think about, and Councilmember Dorito alluded to this, you know, this area is within a watershed, right? And if you think about a watershed in its most basic terms, watershed is basically an area into which water flows from various properties within that area, flows to creeks, streams, wetlands, et cetera. And so this is part of a larger watershed. And that watershed extends outside of our boundaries. It includes portions of the city of Milton as well as the city of Roswell. So even if we were to take every possible measure that we could, even draconian measures, we would not necessarily be able to completely control the issue because we have issues happening outside of our borders that influence what happens within. So as we move along, you know, over time, streams, creeks, rivers, they change. Erosion naturally occurs, silt and debris naturally move along those bodies of water. So it's not a static thing, they shift. And we've certainly seen some of that. We've also seen silt and debris build up within the stream beds, which again is at least in some parts naturally occurring. Now, I don't mean to dismiss that perhaps development activity may have contributed to that because significant changes have been made in what we know about and how we handle stormwater. Practices that were in place in the 80s wouldn't fly today. It's much stricter. And in fact, some of these standards that are now applicable to individual residential developments were not applicable prior to 2020. And we saw significant changes in stormwater law going back a little further in 2014. So what we know about stormwater, how we manage stormwater, has changed significantly, and developments that are more recent actually contribute lower amounts to stormwater runoff than older projects, simply because we know more now, and we're more advanced in the techniques and the requirements that we put in place. We do have anecdotally, you know, some indication that water tables are rising in these areas, as Councilmember Mitchell noted. Now, do I have hard numbers to point to that? No, I do not. You know, we're not that deep into, oh, that's a bad choice of words. We're not that far into this to have every piece of data that may be out there. We admit that, right? This is kind of where we are today. But we do know that the ground in the area is staying saturated longer, which makes it less likely for water to absorb, which means more water is flowing towards the creeks and streams. And then, you know, this is an older neighborhood. At the time that this neighborhood was developed, you didn't see curb and gutter installed. Now, why is that important? Well, because the curb and gutter takes water that is coming off of our roadways and channeling into our roadways and keeps them there and flows them into storm drains and other inlets and keeps them off of adjoining properties. So that's another factor. Councilmember Mitchell also mentioned that, his home is on a septic tank. So are many, if not all, of the homes in these neighborhoods. That can contribute as well to some of the issues we're seeing. We have indications that there's contaminants that have gone into the creek at varying times. Now, some of that can be attributed to things like pet waste. You'd be surprised at how much impact pet waste in yards has on contaminants within the creek. But we also know there's horse farms upstream, which horses are bigger, they contribute more. So the point being, there are a lot of issues that are coming together and influencing this. Some things that can be controlled, some that cannot. Now, over the past 5 years, just within this neighborhood, the city's done 80 different work orders to either repair or clean, unclog the stormwater infrastructure. Roughly $350,000 worth of work. We have more yet to do, and you have in your packets some information on the projects that have been done, and there's an additional, I believe, Pete, if I recall, 8, I think, that are outstanding in the current period. So maintenance and repair of those existing structures is critical, and that's some of what Pete was talking about earlier with that $4.2 million across the city. I do not recall if it was Councilmember Dorito or Councilmember Merkel or Mayor Pro Tem Merkel who referenced the private property issue. Understand that the creeks and the tributaries flow across private properties, and they are themselves pieces of private property. And so it's important that we educate and partner with the residents who have those streams and creeks flowing across their property with respect to how those streams and creeks are maintained. Now, somebody mentioned dredging. Let's just dredge the creek. Now, there's a couple of issues there. One, it's on private property. So you've got that. But there's a second issue in that, remember I mentioned earlier that the way we deal with streams, creeks, and rivers has changed significantly over the years. There's a massive permitting process that you would have to go through, which may or may not be granted to do any type of activity like that. It's changed a lot, just as issues like beaver dams. The mayor knows I grew up in a rural area. I was flabbergasted when Pete said, well, you can't just go in there and blow out the beaver dam. I mean, literally where I grew up, we'd go out there with some dynamite and blow the thing up. Well, you can't do that anymore. If you're going to take out a beaver dam, you have to do it by hand. You have to relocate beavers. It's quite a production. So let's talk about what we can do. And what we've done here is we've divided it into 2 different areas, short-term and mid-term. Long-term, we'll speak to in just a moment. But short-term are things that we can do within the next 12 months, okay? Some of these we can do pretty much instantly if you're of a mind to allow it. Some of them may take more of that 12-month period, but it's things like completing the 19 additional maintenance and repair projects on existing stormwater. That's in the works. It's going to happen. Implement increased requirements for single-family residential development or redevelopment, additions, tear-downs, rebuilds, pools, et cetera, creating 1,000 to 499,000 square feet of new impervious areas on lots within the subject neighborhoods. Now, why is this different than what we're doing today? What we're proposing is taking standards that have been applied to projects that added 5,000 square feet or more of impervious area and applying it to these smaller changes. Now, why is it important for you to think carefully about this? You're talking about adding some potentially significant costs to those projects because you have to do soil testing, possible hydrology testing, to determine if measures are going to work, stormwater measures are going to work on those properties. We can develop and present for council consideration a set of architectural and development guidelines addressing elements such as maximum building heights, maximum impervious area, tree save requirements, and other elements to better preserve and protect the character of the subject neighborhoods. Now,
James, do you have a chart of all of this that we could put up there so people online and the audience could see?
and I may have to have you advance it one. Now, the architectural requirements and guidelines, why is that relevant? Well, when you start talking about tree save, things like that, it has an obvious impact on the ability of the ground to soak up water, right? The more vegetation there is, the more able the ground is to take up some of that water. But it also speaks directly to some concerns that have been voiced by residents of the neighborhood. So we're trying to be responsive to the science of stormwater and concerns expressed by the residents who we represent. Design new curb and gutter, piping, and stormwater detention from Meadow Drive and Upshaw between Brook Drive and Meadow Drive. Now, that's not the only place we're going to do it. That's what we can do within the next 12 months. That's already somewhat in the works. Initiate discussions with the superintendent and board members for Fulton County Schools regarding the potential for partnering on improved stormwater management opportunities on the Alpharetta Elementary and Innovation Academy campuses. Now, I want to take a moment and speak to the Innovation Academy campus. The amount of impervious surface area on that campus has definitely increased from what it was. But the impervious area is being handled by stormwater measures that were implemented by the school system. They did implement stormwater control measures to address that impervious area. And in fact, some areas that had previously been what are called bypass areas, right, are now being handled with stormwater management best practices. But there is a lot of opportunity still remaining on that campus. You've got a couple of ball fields, you've got a football field and track area. There is a large green that, to be perfectly honest, I can't tell you exactly what goes on in that space. I think, Pete, you said it was like Georgia Baseball Association practice field or something. I'm sure Morgan can tell us exactly what
I believe the lower field right now is being groomed for lacrosse through our Parks and Rec agreement with Fulton County Schools.
So there's some opportunity there to improve the ability of the soils to absorb, because it's Georgia clay, it's hardpan that has been compacted over time. There may even be the ability within the space to look at additional detention ponds, underground detention, things of that nature. So there's an opportunity to partner with the school system, but it is the school system's property. So we would need to go through some discussions with them, and that can happen over the next 12 months. We can also initiate discussions with the Fulton County manager and the District 1 and 2 county commissioners, Commissioners Hausman and Ellis, regarding sewer infrastructure within the subject neighborhoods. Now, why is this important? We've got some aging septic tanks in that neighborhood. And if indeed the water tables are rising, as anecdotal evidence would seem to indicate, that leaves a potential for either failing or faulty or aging septic tanks to leach contaminants into the groundwater. And potentially, also make some improvements to stormwater along the way if we are able to get sewer connectivity within the neighborhood and then actually connect those residents to the sewer and work with them on doing that. There's been some concern expressed with respect to manholes along the creek and the potential for those during higher water level periods to contaminate the creek. There's the potential to put risers on those. Now, obviously, the county's going to want hard data, but it is certainly something that can be explored over the next 12 months. And then increasing the frequency of the inspections of the existing sewer lines is another thing that we want to talk with the county about. There are some sewer lines within this neighborhood, so we want to make sure that they are being inspected frequently so that they are not adding to the problem. So that's short term. Then we get into midterm, and these are things that over the next 3 years, roughly, can be looked at, which is additional maintenance and repair projects on existing stormwater infrastructure. And that's a matter of budgeting, right? Design new curb and gutter piping and stormwater detention along Brook Drive and Upshaw between Brook Drive and Mayfield. So that's kind of continuing that work that we're going to be doing in the short term and improving that curb and guttering within the neighborhood. Creating conceptual plans for improved stormwater management strategies on the Alpharetta Elementary and or Innovation Academy campuses. That is dependent upon, obviously, the discussions we have with the school system and what they're willing to work with us on. And then we wanted to look at, again, coming back to funding, how we may be able to work with residents within the neighborhood to help support some of the activities that we think would be useful but that need to take place on private property. Develop and present for City Council consideration a local grant program to aid residential property owners within the subject neighborhoods to connect to sewer system and close out their existing septic tanks. And then develop and present to Council a second local grant program to aid the subject neighborhoods and other neighborhoods meeting similar criteria to repair existing stormwater facilities that serve the neighborhood, not serve individual properties, but serve the neighborhood. And a lot of times this is going to deal with stormwater detention ponds. Some of the older neighborhoods, especially those that don't have HOAs, they haven't been maintained because it's typically the responsibility of the HOA to maintain them. If you don't have an HOA, they've been sitting there. And so basically helping considering a way to help those neighborhoods catch up. Now, some of this includes design work, and there's some work that Pete would have to do with respect to other measures that may be applicable, and we'd need to account for that within that, hopefully that midterm period, to deal with some of that design, and then that could then turn into longer-term projects of a capital nature as far as implementation goes. Now, we're going to continue to work with within our departments to improve coordination and communication with the residents of these neighborhoods. I think one of the issues that we've had is Public Works has been coming at it from their angle, community development's been coming at it from their angle, and it hasn't necessarily been cohesive at times, or at least it hasn't appeared cohesive. And so we're going to be working on that. That's why I'm standing here tonight. That's why I'm part of this project, is to work on the coordination between the departments to make sure that we're bringing everybody together to bring the best ideas for your consideration and implement them as efficiently as possible, but also to improve the communication with the neighborhood. Dependent on the direction or feedback that you give us tonight, we would like to start that by taking this information and going and having a meeting directly with the neighborhood, the residents of these neighborhoods, and starting that conversation with them, and then continuing on from there. So that's kind of the game plan we're prepared to present tonight. Again, Pete, Kathy, and Jill are here to help in answering any questions, and at this time we'll be glad to try to answer those for you.
Councilman Will.
That was amazing, James. Your
That's
depth of
their
knowledge on this topic and just rattling it off without having to read notes is impressive. I just had one question going back to your short terms. It was like the second bullet point, increased requirements for single-family development between 1,000 and 4,999. And you made the comment that it would be potentially expensive for people that are trying to develop in that area, but is it possible for us to focus that additional fee on a specific area, say within 500 feet of a floodplain, so that it's only expensive where we need the problem and not throughout the entire city?
Yes, definitely. And in fact, when we were beginning to work on this and trying to kind of frame this report, we were trying to come up with a tiered system within the community. And we got as far as tier 1 and kind of ran out of time to make it to tonight's meeting. So we didn't define tier 2 or tier 3 yet. And I knew if I said tier 1, everybody would go, well, tell me what tier 2 is, right? So yes, you very much can do that. And we've got examples from cities around the country that have done that very thing. If you go back to the first page of this paper, there are 3 criteria that were established and as to why we looked at this neighborhood. And it's the beginnings of kind of building that tier system. For this neighborhood, it's a residential area developed prior to Georgia's adoption of modern stormwater management practices and regulations in 1990. The area includes homes that are located within a designated floodplain, and there's regularly occurring flooding of residential properties or structures within the area. And you can define it more granularly than that, and then you start to measure out those impacts and set up those tiers. And for most of the city, this is not an issue, right? We're going to see more of this on the west side than the east side. The east side developed later when more of the modern strategies were in place. So yes, that's a very long way of saying yes, we can do that.
Councilman Heights.
So for my part, Mr. Drinkard, I drove through the neighborhood yesterday after church, and it had been raining for a couple of days, and I saw standing water, but what I can't see is what that neighborhood would have looked like in 1990 after the same amount of rain. So as we work through this process, there is a problem, but I want to define the problem. There is data sources of what the floodplain looked like before these houses were built in the mid-'80s. I've gone on to the property tax records and seen that most of them were built in the mid-'80s. And FEMA is supposed to update its maps every 5 years. I know that they don't, but there is a progression of maps. That is data. This is tied to the insurance industry. So I want to see whether or not the extent of flooding has increased, hasn't increased. If it has increased, is it substantial? Now we have defined a problem that what people are experiencing now is worse than what they experienced 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And if it is worse, then I want to focus on causation. Anecdotal stories are insightful, but they don't necessarily lead to a conclusion. The suggestion that the water table has risen without any proof behind that, it can be insightful, but it may or may not be a fact. And if it's not a fact, it doesn't help us solve the problem because we don't have the causation. The watershed comes up from just north of Andover. Folk Hiller Creek comes out just north of Andover Drive. think it goes right through Larry Adig's yard, right after it comes out of the ground. It's, somewhat speaking, a relatively small watershed that grows rather quickly, especially when it gets behind Pebble Trail and comes on down when there's significant rain. But if the flooding is greater than it used to be, what is it in the watershed that is contributing to it by the time it gets to the neighborhood around the elementary school? Areas south of the elementary school aren't affecting the flow of water into that area. So when we go through this, I'm interested in what is the problem, and once we've identified the problem, what's the causes, and what's the data, and what's anecdotal. The mayor has indicated, and I'll leave it to the mayor to make those decisions, that members of the public may come up. If the members of the public do come up and live in this neighborhood, I am very interested to know how long you've lived there. Have you lived there 5 years, or have you lived at your house 20 years? And what can you tell us as a council about your experience, but knowing, because I don't think it's a question and answer, so I'm going to depend on y'all to tell me, oh, I've lived there for 10 years, I've lived there for 2 years. I'd love to know your frame of reference to identify what the problem is, and so we can get to some of the causes. I don't think there's a lot of horses between Andover Drive and Meadowbrook. And so, if there's any contamination in the water, I want to know what the causes are and not be guessing at it, because if we're guessing, we can't solve them. So that's what I want to work through.
Mayor Pro Tem Merkel.
I also want to applaud you, James, and I appreciate the work that went into this, the research. I agree with Councilman Hypes. We got to be careful at guessing on some stuff, and I know you only had a week to work on it, and not saying you guessed a lot of stuff, but it came in, like you said, anecdotally. I spent over an hour and a half Saturday driving through the neighborhood, so if any of y'all saw a gray pickup truck, that was me. So I went to every spot on that map that showed the red and the green, projects that had been done and projects that are going to be done. It was a different one than that. There you go, right there. I drove all those streets. I looked at all these spots and tried to find where some of them weren't really obvious, but you could tell there was a manhole cover, so in that spot, obviously, there's something underneath it. But what I was surprised about and impressed with is the number of projects that have already been done in the neighborhood. So we're not, the city has not been ignoring this. And the topography in that neighborhood, as those of you that here live there, you know that. I mean, there's peaks and valleys, exactly what you said. There's roads with no curbs. There's some in there with curbs, and there's some that have gutter, no curb, but there is no funnel system. So all that water, and so much of it just runs downhill. And then there's some high spots in here. Obviously, we're not seeing any repairs. So mine's more of a comment than it is a question, just to say that I am impressed and happy to see that Pete's gang's been in there. I mean, there's fresh, straw in the dirt in the areas that they've been working on right recently. So, and I did notice in each one of the stream crossings, the water was pretty low. So I'm guessing it does drain pretty quick once the rains back off. I live on the east side, but my backyard is a floodplain. Comes off a big creek. We get lake view about 3-4 times a year. Actually, this year's been a few more, but water is water, and it's going to go where it needs to go, which is always downhill. So I appreciate this is being addressed here. Pebble Trail, we've had some experience down there. We did a rotary project to help in one of the areas. Yeah, that's just spot on. 30 years ago, it's just water. What do we care? But now it's gotten to the point that it's gotten to. So thank you for what you've done.
Councilman Dorito.
Thank you, Mayor. First, a question for Councilman Wells, just clarification. I didn't understand your question. Were you asking about having an isolated fee area of the city, or?
Yeah, what he was saying was that we have this stormwater fee and impact fee. What's the fee for over 5,000 square feet?
It's not a fee. It's some additional requirements for things that they would have to do with respect to soil testing and things like that.
Additional requirements over 5,000. He said one of his solutions potentially was to drop that from 5,000 to 1,000, but that would make an additional fee for people that are building in that area.
There would be a cost.
Additional cost.
My question
To
was,
the-
can we
to the
limit
builder,
that
right,
fee
or
to
the-
just around the floodplain?
Do it in this area, make it within a certain number.
Correct.
Gotcha, I
Which
gotcha.
is
Oh, okay.
what we have planned.
I understand. First, James, Kathy, Pete, entire staff, great job. Kind of giving us a framework or a straw man as to kind of isolating a high level, both some of the, I guess, to just follow up on Councilman Hype's question of perceived, I guess, causations, and some of the both short-term and midterm kind of solutions. I think we're obviously going in the right direction with this. I would almost take, and this is just kind of brainstorming, listening to everybody. And by the way, we did get a video last Monday night, I think, Mayor, and I can't remember offhand what that, I was kind of looking for it, but when that video was taken, so I don't know if it was recent, or do you remember?
I think I've received 2 of them over the past 2 weeks, but
Right.
it was probably a week
Was
and a
it
half ago.
current video? Does anybody recall? I don't recall when it was.
We believe that at least one of those was done in September during.
Okay, so it's pretty recent, so it's part of the, I guess, I'll call it evidence to address Councilman Hype's suggestion of basically confirming the causations of the problems there. I would like personally to take this information and the input from the council tonight, and I don't know if the mayor's going to let some of the residents speak, and the input we've already received from the residents, and almost isolate, focus on the existing problems that we see in this area of the city. Some of these other things, whether it be changing some requirements on new construction or expanded footprint or what have you, those are like futuristic, addressing, future expanded construction. I'd like to really isolate, how do we, really focus on addressing the existing issues and confirm those existings, as Councilman Hype already alluded to. So, because until we really understand that fully, I know we might talk about a possible fee structure, which is an option for the city to help fund some of these potential improvements that are required, or grant programs or whatever we decide to do. We really have to get our hands around this and understand the impact, both what those monies would do to the taxpayers in Alpharetta, and both short-term and long-term. And it's not going to be a cheap situation. Do we consider, floating revenue bonds, which doesn't have to go to the voters, for my understanding, doesn't have to go, and Tom can answer this, we could issue revenue bonds to address some of these issues as well, versus a stormwater fee. Because stormwater fee is going to apply to both exempt properties, schools, everything in the city. So we have to kind of be careful of how we fund these types of things in the future, and that's a discussion, as I think Mayor Gilvin alluded to earlier. We got our hands around the whole problem and determine with our partners, with the county and elsewhere, how we're going to address these issues. The funding mechanism to do that is something that probably can't take place till that happens. That's just my personal opinion.
Councilman Binder.
Thank you, sir. Was this the area that we discussed in last year's council retreat at Avalon? I just remember there was a neighborhood and everyone's like, we need to get this done now.
Yes.
Was that a year ago?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and it led to the phase 1 design that we're on currently.
Well, good. So I think this is good, but we need to get to conclusion. And I'm going to use mine until nauseous about singing from the same hymnal on what are we going to do. So we've kind of been discussing it for a year, but would love to see it. I guess I understand, and I think the mayor brought up a good point on the 1980s. They accepted it a different way in this, but I also get concerned now when I see applications saying, hey, accept this stream variance, it's cool. And I don't know if I'm creating the problem for future councils like 1980s council or government did it for us. So I need us to get to a better place, maybe just for me, and maybe I'm 1 out of 7, of having a better confidence of the stream buffer variances and the things that we're approving. Because we're hearing, oh, they're doing stream restoration and it's going to look great, but what is it going to look like 10, 20 years from now? So that's a big piece of it. The other one too is, I understand it's in 1980 street, built with, what are these houses, mostly ranches, smaller homes, correct? Putting on that. But when is it incumbent on us that it's a street that's our responsibility, that we're allowing redevelopment with more impervious surface, that maybe we should say, hey, maybe we should get those streets up to closer to code where they are today. So I do think we have somewhat responsibility on that, and I do agree that it's working with the county, but would love to see something similar that we've seen on that Brookfield Park of, okay, what can we do? What can we do today to make it look right? And then how do we partner with the people responsible for it? But I do think we need to fasten the pace a little bit on this. So I don't think we're going to get any kind of executable answers over the next year. So that's 2 years now on the clock. So we'd love to hear a timeline on what the next steps are and when.
Okay.
Hopefully it's sooner.
Councilman Mitchell?
Thank you. James, would you mind if Jill Bessanet came up and spoke to, no offense.
I'm taking, I'd go to her too.
We already have certain mechanisms in place for new development that comes in, and we spoke about it not 6 months ago, and we voted on it and things like that. Can you just give us an overview of everything we voted on for those new developments so that the public is well aware of that and that we're reminded?
Sure. It should be on your screen in front of you. Do you see it on your screen in front of you? Okay. So in 2020, December 2020, the City Council voted to approve our new Stormwater Ordinance. That ordinance took out the exemption of standalone single-family homes that were developing 5,000 square feet or more new or replaced impervious. So anytime they're taking down a small home and building one of these much larger homes, they're right at that kind of 5,300, 4,900, or 4,990 is kind of where we're seeing this neighborhood fall with most of these developments. So we, at that point, said, you know what, at the 1,000 to 4,999 in this watershed, because we have drainage concerns in Faux Killer Creek, we're going to have them do green infrastructure infiltration measures if they fall below 5,000, and anything above 5,000 they had to do full detention, which requires an engineered design, soil testing, the whole gamut. The same thing that you would do if you were building a brand new commercial development. Of course, it's much smaller scale on your single family lot, but it is a full design study. Today, after hearing what the neighbors have told us, and out of an abundance of caution, we said, let's come forward and require soils testing. If we're going to make them do infiltration measures, and we've heard that they're not working because of high water tables, let's go ahead and make them have to do the soils testing. So that way we can make sure they're actually going to work. They have a chance. So we're going to have them do a soils test. We're going to have them certify that they put it in per the design. And we're going to have them do a maintenance BMP that gets recorded with their property records. So every future homeowner will know that's in the ground and they're responsible for it. If the infiltration doesn't work, we're going to say, okay, hire an engineer, and you need to get something better designed for your property that can handle that high water table or can handle that lack of infiltration, so that we don't have the exacerbating issues from new development coming forward. Now, that's not solving something that's already there today, but it does look at putting the onus on the developer to make sure that they're not exacerbating the issue. And that's where the thresholds came in.
Okay. And a soil test, we're not talking about just having someone come out and test it for a couple of thousand. My understanding is these things can cost up to $20,000, is that correct?
Soils test typically doesn't cost that much. Soils test does cost a thousand, couple thousand, depending on how many you're doing. But if they don't have infiltration, then we're talking about you have to hire an engineer. You have to do a full engineered design study. That can be $10,000, $20,000 plus building the large underground tank, as opposed to a rain garden or a small flow well, which is a small rocked pit in your yard. So this is the big tanks or the big half-round pipes surrounded by rock that can be quite large, and those can be more expensive.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. This entire area, Alpharetta, the whole, I look back from a historical context. The whole point of us moving to this city hall where we once were, where the restaurant is now, it was because there were so many water sources here, and the city needed that underground water, and it was so plentiful. And it revealed itself again when Teasley Place built the building. And if you recall, they had all kind of underwater issues with flooding. They couldn't get the pipe in quick enough because it would flood again. So it's not anecdotal that our water table is higher in this area. It's very much, I mean, when we have basements flooding, when we have people, constantly dealing with it, there's nothing anecdotal about it, but
We just
there.
haven't done any specific tests or mapping of any water table that I can pull out and say, here it is, here's the changes, here's what's happened.
And to get that data from a city's perspective in these various neighborhoods, what kind of dollars are we looking at? Just a rough estimate.
I have no idea.
But it's not going to be cheap, is it?
Correct.
If we get real data that shows.
Right. And water table does fluctuate. It fluctuates with the weather patterns. So we could have a drought year and it goes way down, and you have really wet weather and it comes up. So, and it changes throughout the year. So that does happen as well.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mayor Pro Tem Merkel.
Yeah, I heard a couple of comments up here, but I want to reiterate back that there have been 79 repairs completed with another 8 still scheduled in this area, and a total of, I believe Pete said, $350,000. So I want people to understand, excuse me, it's not being ignored, right? We may not be at the level we need to be at, but I'm happy with the direction. I'm happy with the new sense of urgency. And yes, at another discussion, we'll talk, like anything, how do we pay for it? So, but I can assure you it's not going to be something we're going to come back and go, hey, we don't have the money. We're going to find some answers to some of these solutions. But also keep in mind, when we keep talking about private property, you open a real slippery slope if you have city and city money coming on your property and shoring up a creek that just naturally erodes. I mean, it came with the property you bought. So those solutions are going to involve as much as we can without getting too far down that road, is my personal feeling. So thank you.
Councilman Dorito.
Thank you, Mayor. I can't help but to sit here and look out into the audience, our neighbors out there, that if I was sitting there with this problem in my backyard, that I'd want to hear from the governing body that we're proactively looking at solutions, and we are, as Mayor Pro Tem Merkel just alluded to. I do think some overtures in the discussion up here is leading toward confusion as to, the commitment of the city to move on this topic. I, for one, am very committed to moving quickly on it, as Councilman Binder requested. But I also look back to last year when I wasn't on the city council, when this governing body, the previous governing body, talked about the almost $30 million bond issue, and there was a big debate on that. There was not much thought or consideration given to using some of the bond dollars for stormwater improvements in the city. So I think we need to be very careful as to the reality of the situation that the city has committed monies to maintenance of the stormwater facility, at least the city assets, for many years. This problem I became aware of when I joined the council, and I think we're beginning to get the council moving forward very rapidly, as evidence of tonight's presentation by city staff that the mayor requested. And I don't want the people in the audience, going back to my initial comment, to feel like this is going to be like a beach ball being tossed around up here because someone wants to move quickly, someone wants to do this. There's a lot of issues here, as I pointed out in my earlier conversation, initially with the previous workshop item, that has to be considered. And I want to be very transparent to my neighbors. I want them to know that, as you pointed out, Mr. Drinkard, dredging a creek bed is not as easy as it sounds. You can't just go in there with a shovel or a hoe and dredge it out. EPA has to be involved. Army Corps of Engineers has to be involved. There's a lot of environmental requirements to even, move a beaver creek, as you talked about. And so as rapidly as we want to move, there's going to be governmental agencies outside of this body that is going to cause us to follow a path, a permitting process to achieve that. And I don't want to think, our neighbors to think like this is going to be solved tomorrow. It's not. And I think the biggest thing, and the elephant in the room that was mentioned by Mayor Pro Tem Merkel already, and I want to be very clear on this, we're talking about private property here. And we have other areas of the city, Academy Park, Midwick, other areas of the city that have maybe not as exacerbated issues of stormwater management, but they too have issues on their private property. And so we need to be careful that we're handling this a way that's responsible to the taxpayers of the entire city, and that we don't open up a can of worms because we have other issues, without getting into it, that could become requests of private property owners that will come to your city council to want us to now address some of their issues on their property because we did this for other property owners. So it's a fine-tuned balancing act that we have to deal with. I'm not saying that if there's a environmental issue or if there's a contamination of the water in the tributary for whatever reason, and those are things that government should address and try to help address those things. But we are going to have limitations, there's no doubt about it. When I looked at the report in, was it 1983?
Yes, sir.
FEMA, where they made it from a high flood risk area to a moderate flood risk area.
84.
Part of that was because of the radar report, where they actually did dredge the creek or expand it or whatever, and that was part of the requirement for them to lower the risk level. And obviously there hasn't been a lot of maintenance of it since then. And so, and in 2020, with all the new requirements, this is all prior to that. And so we're dealing with some old age issues, as it's been pointed out, that is now sitting here in front of this governing body to try to deal with. But I will leave you with this. We are responsible to our neighbors to respond to this issue and be honest with them as to what we can and cannot do. Because at the end of the day, whatever we decide to do here or other parts of the city, it's your tax dollars. It's not our money. It's your tax dollars that we're going to be spending. So we have to be very careful and vigilant on how we invest those monies.
Thank you, James.
Yes, sir.
And thank you to our staff. I know y'all walked into a buzz saw a few weeks ago when you went in expecting to talk about community development issues and were faced with the issues of the drainage and weren't prepared for that discussion. I do appreciate the efforts you've put in as staff and with our elected officials giving guidance and input. to bring this plan forward. Just make a couple of points. I'll try to be brief because I know y'all have been here a long time. So one of the points, and the reason I had James show you that design is this is a very complex issue. I know there's a lot of people that think it's because of bigger houses or new developments, but there's a lot of moving parts on this thing. It's not that simple. If it had been that simple, if there was one bad actor or something that was easy to fix, we would have already resolved that years ago, because this is something that's been on our radar. I've known about this for years, and that's why I've tried to get more money for stormwater. When I first got on council, I think we were spending about $300,000 a year at that point on stormwater maintenance and repairs. And then when we had a catastrophic pipe failure, we'd pull it from unallocated capital and go out there and fix a pipe on Waters Road or something. And that's not the way I think we should do things. But I'm also one of 7. And so over the time, we've done a much better job. We've invested in the stormwater to a greater extent. But to the point that Councilman Dorito made earlier is, I think everyone has to understand that some of these issues are on private property, and the ability of us to come in and fund improvements on private property just isn't very practical. That doesn't mean there aren't solutions. That's why we've proposed some and will continue to review more. But the fact is, every property owner along a creek or a stream in the city of Alpharetta has issues with erosion and different typical problems. And I promise you, as much as this may cost, if we were to go in and try to do all of that and to assume the responsibility for that, the neighborhood of Windward has creeks and a 200-acre lake. And if we're investing on improvements on private property, they're going to be raising their hand, and that's going to be astronomical. I live in Academy Park now. They've got a creek and a stream erosion issue over there, and that would be a lot of money. And so there's a reason why we have to look at solutions, and perhaps that's why I proposed a grant program to help private property owners address issues on their private property, and perhaps use some public financing to help do that. But it's not going to be, I don't see how we can just, even if we raised a fee, to make a commitment to the private property owners in the city of Alpharetta that we are your solution. Wholeheartedly, we're going to come in and fix every drainage problem, every water problem, every stormwater problem in the city of Alpharetta, or you're going to live in a city with a very different tax base. The millage rate would be astronomical, or the stormwater fee, or whatever we ended up, because you would be talking about tens of millions of dollars each year, not $3 or $4 million each year. So I want y'all to understand, the proposal that we brought here is something that we are committed to. I am committed to. Heck, I was committed to this years ago. You know, Councilman Dorito mentions that he remembers the discussions about the bond issue last year. You're right. We knew about this a year ago plus. And as part of those bond discussions, I pointed it out from this dais. If we spend this money all on parks and recreation, which I fully support and love, that means that was $1.5 million, $1.65 million for the next 30 years, for the next 25 years. So that was cash flow, an additional 1.5, which if you added that with what we're spending now, would have gotten us 2/3 of the way where we need to be to begin with. But our council decided not to. And the gentleman that was sitting in Mr. Dorito's seat at that time actually said he didn't care whether we spent it on the equestrian park or another park or what we spent it on. He just wanted to do it. That's not leadership. Leadership was those of us that saw that doing parks is great, but we had an opportunity to fix this problem in a major way without having to raise taxes last year, and we missed that opportunity because the majority of our council decided to go ahead and spend that entire $29.5 million of bonding capacity on Parks and Recreation. And we're going to do it. We're going to have the best named Parks Department in 5 years that we possibly can. And I value those improvements we're making. But when I talked earlier about things that are practical and council priorities, that's where we let y'all down. And I'm sorry. I said it publicly at the time, but that's where we let you down. We're committed to this. We need more details. We'll have to get cost estimates, and then we'll have to decide how we'll pay for it. But I promise you I'm still committed to it, and we're going to follow through as quickly as we possibly can. Councilman Binder.
I will say, now I understand, we have a priority on this. I will say on that Parks Bond issue, at least six of the elected officials at the time said they were supportive of it, depending on what T-Splosh had. There was 2 that were holding off. So I think in times of trouble, we start blaming previous leadership. It goes back to the old joke. We start saying how complex it is. All I can tell you people is just keep the heat on and just keep asking us for answers, because it is complex, but that's what you hired us to do. So keep us accountable on it, and you do deserve answers. But I think if it's a 1980s street, we do owe it to get in there, and hopefully we can eventually get to the same page on this. So looking forward to it.
Thank you, James. If there's no other questions for staff.
Mayor and Council, as we understand it, at this point, we may proceed with down the path we've laid out tonight. Go ahead, have a meeting with the neighborhood to continue that discussion, and simultaneously we'll work on collecting more data so that we can bring additional solutions to you. Have I interpreted that correctly?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the plan you presented, let's take action as quickly as possible on those things that can have an impact immediately. Let's get those changes made, get those projects started and things like that, and begin the research, and let's figure out how to get to the next step. That it's going to take a little more time and thought.
Very good.
But thank you for doing this. So as you noticed in the previous 2 workshops, we didn't take public comment because typically this is just an opportunity for us to have discussions. You know, since we're not dealing with our money, we're dealing with your money. We can't have these discussions without you being in a public forum. And so that's why we have workshops. It's not a vote taken tonight. We're just giving input to move forward, and we'll have to vote on all of those things that we just discussed tonight. Because I know you're passionate and I know you've been suffering with this issue for a long time, I'm going to allow y'all to have comments. And I ask that if you can, there's a few typical rules. One, when you speak into the mic, please give us your name and your address. That's for the public record. That's anytime anybody comes up and they do that. And I ask that let's please try to be brief, because we've got a lot of people here. I don't know how many are going to want to speak, but I want everyone who wants to be able to. So I ask, and this is something that's not just for y'all. I do this all the time when we have a large crowd. Try to limit yourselves to 3 minutes, okay? I mean, typically you've got certain points. I know there's a lot of emotion involved, and people want to tell us a lot of backstory and things like that. And I'll be considerate, but if everybody in the audience tonight spent 5 minutes, we'd be here for 2 more hours at least. And so just be considerate of your neighbors and the other people that are here. And I will say that if you just want to say, you know, ditto, if you agree with something and you just want to stand up and say, I don't need to speak, but I agree, or something, that's fine too. So with that being said, we'll begin with anybody who may have turned in a speaker's card. And then once that's done, I'll still give opportunities for those who may not have turned in a card. Ms. Shapiro?
Yes.
Do you have any public comment cards?
Yes, Mayor. Our first public comment card that we have is a Miss Heather, I apologize, Wheeler or Whaler? Weiler. Great. If you don't mind to come forward to the podium and just state your name and address for the record.
I'm Heather Weiler, 211 Brook Drive. I've lived there for 7 years. And I definitely want to say thank you so much. 100% agree with everyone who said this is not going to be fast. This is nature and science and all kinds of things. So this is the studies and everything that are going to go into this. It's not going to happen overnight. I'm well aware of that, and appreciate you being transparent about that with us. 3 minutes, I promise. I timed it. I want to acknowledge the work being done and the attention being given to our neighborhood. We desperately need the visibility and work to protect our properties, our families, and our health. I would like the council to immediately adopt and enact a temporary moratorium on all construction, including pool construction, even those that have a current permit but have not yet begun construction. I believe that my neighbors and I have provided evidence that clearly shows the immediate danger we are in due to the constant change in topography and groundwater redistribution. It is clear to me that any further disturbance to the properties, especially pools that on average cause around 14,000 gallons of water to be redistributed and impose immediate danger to our home safety and livelihood. The current codes are not adequate, even though they may be legal, and even though something is legal doesn't make it right. Codes need to be revised and updated based on the development in our neighborhood. Once a solution ensures long-term sustainability and the safety of current residents in place, construction would resume. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Ms. Shapiro?
We have no other comment cards have been turned in, but if anyone else would like to speak this evening, please come forward. Oh, yep.
Please come forward, and if you'd like, just to save time, if anyone else who wants to speak, go ahead and queue up so that we don't have to wait for others to come up.
Yeah, so Eric Boyer, I live at 388 Meadow Drive. I've been there since 2014. My biggest thing I want to talk about is private property. My private property is your watershed. That's your drainage solution, right? If I wall off my property, I get sued by my neighbors for flooding them out. Your inability to manage this as a city and saying that you can't do anything about my private property is very frustrating, because without my private property, you don't have a drainage system in my neighborhood. There is no stormwater management because both sides of that creek run through mine. So if we're not going to do something about it, can I start charging you guys in the city for using my property as drainage? I mean, what are we going to do here?
Thanks, sir.
My name is Judy Gavan. I'm at 300 Meadow Drive. I've been there, July will be 22 years. The only time since I've been there that creek has crested and flooded my property was during Hurricane Ivan. I think it was Ivan, and the whole city of Atlanta flooded. It was like you needed Noah's Ark to get anywhere. Now, with all this development that's going on in our neighborhood, I have pictures and I can show you. The only thing that saved my property was massive amounts of ivy. On both sides of me, it was like Lake Lanier. There are things falling into the creek that are backing it up. I'm just saying that the building that's being done in our neighborhood has severely affected our property. And it's causing flooding that we did not have before. I know we're on a floodplain, but this has never happened in the almost 22 years that I have been there, except that one time. So I agree with Heather that until you can figure out what to do, there should be a moratorium on any further permits and building in that neighborhood, because we're all going to end up suffering. So, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council and staff. I appreciate your presentation tonight. I believe you've heard us. I believe I hear some good things so far. I really appreciate the effort and the support I'm seeing so far. My name is Joe Gillis. I live at 3181 Maple Lane, which is in the Milton Glen area. I've lived there since 2007, so I know there was a request to hear how long we lived there, so that is how long I've been there. Between 2007 and maybe 2-3 years ago, I'm not sure exactly, I'd only seen water seep into my basement one time, and I'm at one of the higher places. I'm one of the higher parts of the neighborhood, so I'm not really in the area that's going to flood from the actual creek, but I'm more, I believe, from the groundwater that seeps through my basement is higher. But I've definitely seen in the last few years higher groundwater in my basement. 3 or 4 times I've seen that. And of course, it was 2009 that everybody had the flood, and it was terrible through the whole neighborhood. But since then, I've seen not minor, but compared to 2009, less, but still bad flooding several times that I had not seen before in my neighborhood. So I'm just giving you anecdotal evidence from my experience living there that I've seen that. And I've heard some good ideas and solutions so far. I definitely think that the idea of the tear down and rebuild up is just part of the issue. It's more complex than that. Obviously, the whole watershed that should be looked at. That new work that was on Mayfield Road, just west of Mayfield Circle, that needs to be looked at, see if that has caused some additional flow through the area. I also think a lot of the development that's been going on in the west side of downtown is seeing some increasing flow from that. I think it's just a multi-faceted issue, and I do feel like there is some commitment to look into that, spend some money, and figure out how to help myself and my neighbors get through these problems. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening. Sorry. Bonnie Major, 170 Meadow Drive. I'm one of the new development homes in the neighborhood. We were drawn to the neighborhood, obviously, because of its location and its quiet ability to enjoy the life of everything Alpharetta has to offer. I think the main thing that I appreciate everybody. I think everybody's input is really important. The only thing that I go back to is I believe what Councilman Merkel and Councilman Dorito said, which was we really need to figure out where this is all coming from. I think people can assume where it's coming from or want to point where it's coming from, but I do believe that there is a strong cohesiveness that needs to take place between Fulton County Schools and the city and Public Works. I think that I have a lot of water that comes from the school. The detention ponds that have been put in place are not collecting the water that they need to collect. So there might just be some regrading issues. But I think instead of moratoriums and stifling anything right off the bat, that more work needs to go into researching why the water is really happening the way it is. But I can only just say that when you walk around during the rain, those ponds, those detention areas are not filling up, and they are overrunning into the neighborhood, which is creating the water runoff, or a portion of it. So that's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, my name is Buck Bailey. Been living in Alpharetta for 40 years. And I was co-chair of the barn referendum, the first one we ever had. And I remember it distinctly. We had to get a lot of little things started. Radios for the policemen, a new fire truck, a new city hall, and et cetera. And the thing had to pass on 5 items. All of them had to pass or the barn referendum was dead. And the last one was the parks. We had them all in there. And we had handwritten ballots. And the vote came in, we stayed up there till 2 or 3 o'clock, and we didn't have but about 400 or 500 voters. But they voted for it and it passed. And we were really glorified. And I want to ask John to come to my house. I was there when this radar report you got in 1983. Mr. Phillips was our mayor. We had a beaver dam down there.
Where is your house?
My house is at 170 Mayfield Circle, and I'll take you on a history trip of what the creek has done to my property. I'm not in a floodplain, but it gets flooded all the time. And the creek has washed out 2 or 3 dump loads of dirt and sand downstream, so I got gully holes out there. There's a lot of trees that have fallen in there that have fallen down because of erosion. Every time you call the city in the past, they come out there, but they can't walk in the creek like it's poisoned ground. They won't even walk on it, and it's all jumbled up and everything with the streams and everything coming around. And when we built the sidewalk going up Providence Road, the creek was okay. But when y'all put that thing up the road and it got all that water coming down Providence Road into the crevices and right there at Mayfield where it gets in an intersection with our street, Mayfield Circle, that's where all the problem and water congregated. And then when we started on these big, big houses up here, and see y'all put these big monster tanks in the ground to try to ease the problem, I have one right across the street from it, and we still got the problem. So something needs to be done, and I'm glad y'all are ahead putting a searchlight on it and trying to get it done. But John, if you can come, we had a pasture behind us. And my backyard had a barbed wire fence across the creek, and it was a cow pasture. And we would call the police department to come get the cows out of my yard. And here comes our only policeman, shiny shoes, a little car he had been used, but it was a police car. And he stomps out there and rings the doorbell, comes out, and he says, "Where's the cows?" I say, "There's 3 of them right there in the backyard. They were up over the hooks in mud." And he said, "Shoo, cow." And the cow looked at him and said, "Who do you think you are?" And so he stomped a little closer and got his shiny shoes all in that mud. So that was a comical thing for us. But really, we do have a problem, and y'all understand it. And I don't know what the solution is, but if you can look at what's happening to that creek and where all that water's coming from, and you talk about fixing all the water up there on Upshaw and around Miller, some of those areas right there, we're on the other end of it. And now you got 4 houses up on the end of our street for sale with lots. And there's 4 big homes gonna be up there. They sold them off and they got signs up there. All that water that they disturb up on those hills gonna come right down Mayfield Circle. Water goes downhill. We get water off of Maple coming in and it gets on Mayfield Circle. And all that water just keeps coming down there and it goes over the curb and into our front yard. And I have a house that's built on a crawl area with paved crawl area in it, and it stays water in it every time it rains. Now, the last flood we had, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, when we took these movies all over this, that was the worst flood ever. It wasn't that hurricane. This last one we had, it raised the water level that higher up in that creek and all on our property down there when all these lots got flooded, good and saturated. The house behind me has been flooded 9 times. And the poor guy that bought it didn't know that, and he's living in it. And when that rain came, it came up over his deck, it came up over his cars in his driveway. And he lives on a crawl area, and he's probably got alligators and everything else underneath there for all I'm concerned. And he's graded that lot as best he can and hauled in a lot of rock trying to get ditches to drain, and it just sits there. My backyard, it just sits there. I can walk in my backyard right today and go squish, 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 squish. But we're there. I've been there 40 years, and I'm very proud of that house, and I'm very proud to be a citizen of Alpharetta.
You're gonna bring my wife.
Please, we might have some homemade baked cookies for you. Call me. You got my phone number. It's 404-754-8334. She's got it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, my name is Anna Henderson. I live at 375 Heritage Lane, and I've lived there for 22 years. Folkiller Creek runs behind my neighborhood. I've seen it change over the years in terms of erosion, in terms of the fact that I no longer have a dry backyard, ever. I encourage you all to drive through the neighborhood on the day of a heavy rain or the day after. Saturday and Sunday do not count. A big rain. And also to take a look at Innovation Academy to see what other neighbors are talking about the detention pond that is not capturing the rainwater. In addition to that, we have standing water that remains, especially on Mayfield Circle, for days. The last rain that we had maybe 2 weeks ago took 11 days for that rain to dry up, and it was only because we had a warm, sunny day that finally dried up that remaining water. Part of that problem that causes, especially in the warmer months, is the mosquitoes and the gnats and the potential for snakes. That happens throughout the summer. And you know that when we have weather here, that rain can go on for days, and it does. And we're heading into springtime. So I think there'll be lots of opportunities to drive through our neighborhood when there's a really good, solid rain. But what I really want to talk about today is just asking our city leaders to help us stop the bleeding. And whether that means a moratorium, as some folks have mentioned, or not, I don't know. You know, I don't know all the ins and outs of that. I don't know what our rights are as citizens to ask for something like that. But I do know that to capture the data that is needed to make an informed decision takes a long time. It's like moving a ship. Okay, I work in the financial industry, and you can't turn things around quickly, and that's not going to happen in the city council and with our leaders, and we know that. And we want the data to make informed decisions. But then what do we do in the meantime? You know, I actually think that the plans that are set, that we can set in motion for our short-term and mid-term goals are sound, but how quickly can those begin if we don't have the data ahead of that? So in the meantime, how do we stop the bleeding? And some of that we've heard from neighbors about the types of continued construction that is happening. We have 7 homes right now that are in some sort of process of building, and we have 6 lots that we know right now that will also be built upon. And as Mr. Bailey mentioned, 4 of those are at the top of Mayfield Circle, which that water will only drain down. And personally will affect my home on Heritage Lane on the front side. So again, I just, in closing, I would just say, I think we all want something to stop the bleeding in the short term, while while those that are the subject matter experts look into how to, make some changes for our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to come forward? Not seeing anyone else, so I will go ahead and close public comment. I appreciate your patience. Councilman Heitz has a question for staff.
I don't know to whom to direct this towards. When I was driving through the neighborhood yesterday and looking at some of the development, I don't know if any mature trees were removed and dealt with appropriately under our rules, if you remove a tree and pay in, et cetera. But I am familiar, having sat through an arborist discussion a couple years ago about the massive amount of water that one mature tree can take out of the ground, both through the collection from its leaves and also the root system. So I don't know if there's an answer there. I don't know if there's, again, going back to causation, maybe no large trees have been removed in the development through that neighborhood. But I would ask us to look to see if trees have been and whether or not it's worth taking a harder look at our what we're going to do about trees with redevelopment in areas that we know are being impacted with respect to flooding. Because it was very eye-opening when I sat through that presentation 3 years ago, 2 years ago, whatever it was, about the amount of water trees can remove from the ground. So.
Yes, sir, Mr. Councilman. That is part of the guidelines. Remember, I mentioned some new guidelines that community development was going to be looking at and framing. We don't have those currently framed, but it is part of what they're bringing, going to be working for or towards and bringing back to you for consideration at a later date. But tree save is definitely part of that. Yes, sir.
Sure. Who is that person? I'm here. Please come forward. If you would, state your name and your address for the public record.
My name's Angela Whitehead. I live at 280 Meadow Drive. I had 3 large river oaks on my property. A builder came in and on a Saturday decided to remove half of the limbs that were hanging on his property. We met, took us forever, but anyway, it was resolved with him having to remove all of our water oaks. They were 88 years old, and he had to remove them all and replant. The city did work with us after 7 months of trying to get the builder to do something. They did work with us. They did have it replanted with 4 hard oaks, or not oaks, but 4 hardwoods and then 6 evergreen trees. The whole time I was saying, these are water oaks. They drink a lot of water. This is going to cause, issues in my yard. The canopy was huge, and I don't understand why there were no fines given. And we actually spoke to the builder and mentioned, hey, did you get a fine for breaking the code of killing our trees? And he said, this is fine enough, just having to replant your yard. So if they're not held accountable for butchering your property, they're going to just keep doing it. And it may not be all builders, but this particular builder had no care for my property. And he didn't want the water oaks there. They have teeny tiny little acorns. They drop all over the place. He's building an extremely modern home right beside my brick ranch, and it's just sad, and they're ripping them down everywhere. And I can't help but think that when the property was built in 1972, this is the whole neighborhood is low, that the people who built the neighborhood had some forethought of, hey, maybe we should plant some water oaks to help with the water drainage systems in this area. And we're losing all of them. The builders come in, they're clear cutting them. They might have to pay into a tree save, but they're not going to get the amount of water sucked up that a water oak is. So to answer your question, 3 88-year-old water oaks were removed from my property.
Thank you. And I'll discuss with our staff how we can better address that. But quite frankly, I think that's more of a private property owner's challenge. I mean, if someone were to do that to my property, I would seriously consider litigation.
Sure, but, you know, the problem is, we are a single-income family raising 5 children. We don't have enough money to sue a millionaire. And I shouldn't have to be put in that particular situation when the city should have some, you know, firm consequences for someone like that.
And if you need money to help our neighborhood, why don't you fine these builders? He was not fined a dime.
This isn't a back and forth, I'm sorry. I was just expressing a better way to recover the impact to your community. But we'll certainly discuss with staff what our fines are and what our regulations are and see if there's something else we need to do to promote a little better behavior by those who didn't respect. Is there anyone else that wanted to come forward at this time?
General questions or this?
No, this was just public comment. So we'll close public comment at this time. Are there any reports? If there's no reports, then I will ask that.
No, there's public comments in general. There's some people here to speak,
Oh, that haven't already spoken?
not on that topic, in general.
I just asked for anybody that wanted to come forward,
That's
so
why I was asking, is that specifically against the water situation or in general?
in general,
All right, then we do have somebody.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know nothing about water or stormwater, but appreciate the opportunity to come here and present before you, Mayor and Council. My name is Scott Hilton. I am a resident of Peachtree Corners, Georgia, and I'm here today to announce my candidacy for Georgia House District 48. Before I speak to you, I'd be remiss if I didn't wish Mayor Pro Tem Merkel a happy birthday. I will not sing tonight. I don't think you'd want to hear that. The newly redesigned District of 48 includes portions of Alpharetta, including 5 voting precincts, including Roswell, Johns Creek, Alpharetta, and Peachtree Corners. I previously served in the General Assembly from 2016 to 18, representing 5 cities at that time. And it's been interesting to sit in on this discussion. I think one of the things I'd like to emphasize is having a representative who can fight for you in terms of securing federal, state, and local dollars to help with issues like we've talked about tonight. I believe the best government is local and closest to the people, which is why as your state rep, I will support you and our local voices and our local city council. I look forward to working with you and earning your support and your trust during the campaign and ultimately ask for your vote. Again, my name is Scott Hilton, running for Georgia House District 48, and look forward to getting to know you through the process. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, sir.
Scott. Good luck.
Shapiro, were you trying to catch my attention for something?
Yeah. Yes, Mayor, may I make a report if that's okay?
You may make a report.
So this Saturday, March 5th, we are having a poll worker registration fair partnered with Fulton County. So if you or any one of your friends or children who are adults or anyone in Fulton County that would be interested in serving as a volunteer, you will be compensated at our polls during this election season. I encourage you to visit City Hall. We'll be right across in the other room from 10 to 1 this Saturday.
Thank you for that. So public comments closed. We've had our reports. If there's no other reports, then I would call for a motion to adjourn into executive session.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion by Mayor Pro Tem Merkel and a second, I believe, by Councilman Mitchell. All those in favor of adjourning into executive session, please vote yes. Otherwise, vote no. And it does pass unanimously. Thank you all for being here. And we will be following up.